Imagine standing on a windswept plain 10,000 years ago, watching small groups of humans moving across the landscape with their meager possessions bundled on their backs. The scene stretches endlessly before you, a vast expanse of grassland dotted with occasional groves of wild trees and crossed by meandering streams that glisten in the morning light. These were our ancestors, the last of the great nomadic peoples who had wandered the earth for countless millennia. They moved in small bands of perhaps 20 to 30 individuals, connected by bonds of kinship and mutual dependence that had sustained human communities since the dawn of our species. Watch them as they pause at a hillside spring, the women filling leather pouches with fresh water while children play among the rocks and men scan the horizon for signs of game or danger. Their entire world consists of what they can carry, what they can remember, and what they can find. Every tool, every piece of clothing, every scrap of food represents a careful calculation of weight against utility. They own no land, build no permanent structures, leave no monuments behind them. Yet these seemingly simple people possessed knowledge and skills that had kept humanity alive through ice ages and droughts, migrations and natural disasters that would have destroyed less adaptable societies. They followed the herds of wild aurochs, ancient ancestors of modern cattle, tracking these massive beasts across seasonal migration routes that had remained unchanged for thousands of years. The hunters among them could read the landscape like a book, recognizing the subtle signs that indicated where game might be found, where water lay hidden beneath the surface, where edible plants grew in abundance during different seasons. The women were equally skilled, able to identify hundreds of different plants, knowing which were nutritious, which could heal illness, which were deadly poison, and precisely when each should be gathered for maximum benefit. Their children learned by observation and imitation, absorbing the accumulated wisdom of generations through daily practice rather than formal instruction. A young boy would shadow his father and uncles on hunting expeditions, gradually learning to read animal tracks, to move silently through tall grass, to fashion spear points from flint and bone. A girl would accompany her mother and aunts on gathering expeditions, learning to distinguish edible roots from poisonous ones, to weave baskets from river reeds, to preserve meat and plant foods for times of scarcity. These nomadic peoples lived entirely at the mercy of nature's rhythms, their lives governed by the changing seasons, the movements of animals, the availability of water and wild foods. When the great herds moved, they moved. When drought struck a region, they traveled to areas where rain had been more abundant. When winter approached, they sought shelter in caves or constructed temporary windbreaks from branches and animal hides. Their survival depended on their ability to remain flexible, to adapt quickly to changing conditions, to find resources wherever they happened to be. Yet within just a few centuries, some of these wandering bands would transform human existence forever, laying the foundations for what we now call civilization. The change would not happen overnight, nor would it happen everywhere at once. Instead, it would emerge gradually in certain favored locations where geography and climate combined to create unique opportunities for a new way of life. The transformation would be so profound that it would alter not just how people lived, but how they thought about themselves, their relationship to the land, and their place in the cosmic order. The story of Sumer begins not with grand cities or towering temples, but with this profound shift from wandering to settling, from hunting and gathering to farming and building. This transformation, which scholars call the agricultural revolution, represents perhaps the most significant turning point in all of human history. It was a change so fundamental that it altered not just how people lived, but how they thought, how they organized themselves, and how they understood their place in the world. To truly appreciate the magnitude of this transformation, we must understand what it meant for people who had lived as nomads for hundreds of thousands of years to suddenly begin staying in one place. For nomadic peoples, the idea of ownership was limited to portable possessions. Land belonged to no one and everyone simultaneously. Resources were shared according to need and availability. Leadership was fluid and situational, based on particular skills required for specific challenges. The very concept of accumulating surplus beyond immediate needs was foreign, even counterproductive, since everything had to be carried from place to place. The transition began in a region that would later become known as Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates in what is now modern Iraq. This area, part of what historians call the Fertile Crescent, possessed unique geographical advantages that made it ideal for the development of agriculture. The name Mesopotamia itself, coined by ancient Greek historians, means between the rivers, and it was precisely this location between two great waterways that made the region so special. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers had their sources in the highland regions of modern Turkey and flowed southeastward through hundreds of miles of varied terrain before emptying into the Persian Gulf. Unlike rivers in many other parts of the world, these waterways carried enormous quantities of fertile sediment eroded from the mountains and deposited across the plains during annual flood seasons. This process had been going on for millions of years, creating some of the richest agricultural soil on Earth. The annual flooding of these great rivers deposited rich, fertile silt across the plains, creating some of the most productive soil on Earth. But the flooding was not chaotic or destructive like the floods that devastate modern cities. Instead, it followed predictable patterns that observant people could learn to anticipate and eventually to manage. The floods typically began in late spring, when snow melt in the distant mountains swelled the rivers beyond their normal banks. The water would spread across the floodplains, depositing its load of nutrient-rich sediment before gradually receding, leaving behind fields of incredibly fertile mud perfect for plant growth. The climate was warm and generally favorable, with enough rainfall to support plant growth but not so much as to make the land swampy or unworkable. The region experienced distinct seasons that created natural rhythms for agricultural activity. Winters were mild enough that people could remain active outdoors, while summers, though hot, were not so extreme as to make farming impossible. The combination of reliable water sources, fertile soil, and favorable climate created conditions that were almost ideal for the development of agriculture. But geography alone does not explain why the agricultural revolution happened when and where it did. The shift from hunting and gathering to farming required a fundamental change in human thinking and behavior that went far beyond simply taking advantage of favorable environmental conditions. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had been mobile, following resources rather than creating them. The idea of staying in one place, of deliberately planting seeds and waiting months for a harvest, of storing surplus food for future use, represented a completely new way of understanding the relationship between humans and their environment. This conceptual revolution required people to develop an entirely different relationship with time and space. Nomadic peoples lived largely in the present, responding to immediate opportunities and challenges as they arose. But farming required long-term planning and delayed gratification on a scale that had never before been necessary for human survival. A farmer had to envision future seasons, had to sacrifice immediate consumption in order to save seeds for planting, had to invest labor in preparing fields and tending crops with no guarantee that the effort would be rewarded with a successful harvest. The psychological transformation was perhaps even more profound than the practical one. Nomadic peoples saw themselves as part of the natural world, moving through landscapes that belonged to no one in particular. But farmers had to develop concepts of land ownership, of boundaries, of the right to exclude others from specific areas. They had to begin thinking of the earth not as a source of resources to be gathered when found, but as a partner in production that could be improved and managed through human effort. The process began gradually, probably around 9,500 years before the present era. Small groups of people began to notice that certain wild grasses, particularly varieties of wheat and barley, grew abundantly in certain areas after the annual floods. These wild cereals were already part of the diet of nomadic peoples, who would gather the grain when they encountered it during their travels. But some innovative individuals began to observe these plants more carefully, noticing where they grew best, when they ripened, how their seeds could be processed and stored. Rather than simply gathering these grains when they found them, some innovative individuals began to save seeds and plant them deliberately. This simple act, repeated over generations, led to the domestication of these wild plants and their transformation into the cereal crops that would feed civilizations. The process of domestication was gradual and probably largely unconscious at first. People would naturally tend to save the largest, most nutritious seeds for planting, gradually selecting for traits that made the plants more useful for human purposes. Wild wheat and barley had characteristics that made them well suited for gathering by nomadic peoples but less ideal for farming. The seeds shattered easily when ripe, scattering on the ground where they could germinate naturally, but making them difficult to harvest efficiently. The plants ripened at different times, requiring multiple gathering expeditions to collect the full crop. But as people began to save and replant seeds, they unconsciously selected for mutations that made the plants more suitable for agricultural use. Over hundreds of generations, the wheat and barley grown by early farmers became distinctly different from their wild ancestors. The seeds developed tougher hulls that held them firmly to the stalk until harvested, making it possible to gather large quantities efficiently. The plants began to ripen more uniformly, allowing farmers to harvest entire fields at once. The grains became larger and more nutritious, providing more food value for the effort invested in growing them. The domestication of plants went hand in hand with the domestication of animals. Wild sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were gradually brought under human control, providing not just meat but milk, wool, and labor. The process of animal domestication was even more complex than plant domestication, requiring people to develop entirely new skills and knowledge about animal behavior, breeding, and care. Wild sheep and goats were naturally suited for domestication because they were already social animals that lived in herds with established hierarchies. Humans could insert themselves into these social structures, taking the place of the dominant animals and directing the movements and behavior of the flock. But this required people to understand animal psychology in ways that went far beyond the knowledge needed for hunting. They had to learn how to breed animals selectively, how to care for pregnant females and newborns, how to protect their herds from predators and disease. The domestication of cattle was even more challenging because wild aurochs were large, powerful, and potentially dangerous animals. The process required not just understanding of animal behavior, but also the development of new technologies for controlling and managing these beasts. Ropes, halters, pins, and other tools had to be invented to make cattle domestication possible. The relationship between humans and these animals became symbiotic rather than simply exploitative. Humans provided food, shelter, and protection, while the animals provided resources that could be harvested without killing them, creating a sustainable source of wealth that could grow over time. Milk, wool, and eggs could be collected regularly, providing nutrition and raw materials while preserving the animals for future reproduction. Even the manure produced by domestic animals became valuable as fertilizer for crops, creating a closed system where the waste products of one part of the agricultural system became inputs for another part. This agricultural foundation enabled the first permanent settlements. When people no longer needed to follow herds or search constantly for wild plants, they could build more substantial shelters, accumulate possessions, and develop new technologies. The decision to settle permanently in one location was not made lightly, as it meant giving up the flexibility and mobility that had been central to human survival strategies for countless generations. The earliest settlements were small, perhaps housing no more than a few dozen people, but they represented a revolutionary change in human social organization. These first permanent communities had to solve problems that nomadic peoples had never faced. How could people live in close proximity year-round without the conflicts that inevitably arose being resolved by simply moving apart? How could resources be shared fairly among people who were no longer related primarily by kinship? How could decisions be made that affected the entire community rather than just individual families? Archaeological evidence from sites like Jarmo in northern Iraq shows us what these early farming communities looked like. The houses were simple structures made of mud brick, with flat roofs and small rooms designed for storage as well as living. The choice of mud brick as a building material was itself an innovation that reflected the new relationship between humans and their environment. Nomadic peoples built temporary structures from materials that could be found anywhere: branches, animal hides, stones that could be easily moved. But mud brick required people to process local clay, to shape it into uniform blocks, to dry and cure it properly. The investment of time and labor in creating these building materials only made sense if people intended to stay in one place long enough to justify the effort. The people made pottery to store grain and water, developed new tools for farming, and began to specialize in different crafts. Pottery making was another technology that would have been impossible for nomadic peoples, since ceramic vessels are heavy, fragile, and difficult to transport. But for settled peoples, pottery offered enormous advantages for food storage and preparation. Clay vessels could be made in any size needed, could be shaped for specific purposes, and could be decorated to reflect cultural values and artistic sensibilities. The development of new farming tools reflected the growing sophistication of agricultural techniques. Simple digging sticks gave way to more complex implements designed for specific tasks: hoes for breaking ground, sickles for harvesting grain, grinding stones for processing cereals into flour. Each of these tools represented accumulated knowledge about how to work the land more efficiently and effectively. Some individuals became particularly skilled at making pots, others at weaving cloth, still others at working with stone or bone. This specialization was crucial because it meant that not everyone needed to spend all their time producing food. When farmers could grow enough grain to feed not just themselves but others as well, it freed up some members of the community to focus on other activities. This surplus production, and the specialization it enabled, would prove to be the foundation upon which all later civilizations would be built. The concept of surplus was revolutionary in itself. Nomadic peoples lived largely from hand to mouth, consuming resources as they found them, and moving on when local supplies were exhausted. But agricultural peoples had to learn to produce more than they could immediately consume, to store the excess safely, and to distribute it according to need and social arrangements. This required new technologies for storage, new social institutions for managing distribution, and new concepts of wealth and property that had never before been necessary. The social implications of settled life were profound and far-reaching. In nomadic societies, leadership was often temporary and situational, based on particular skills needed at specific moments. A skilled hunter might lead during times when game was scarce, while someone with knowledge of water sources might take charge during droughts. But permanent settlements required more stable forms of organization that could coordinate complex activities over extended periods. Someone needed to coordinate the planting and harvesting, to organize the storage and distribution of surplus food, to mediate disputes between neighbors who now lived in close proximity year-round. These needs led to the emergence of more formal leadership structures and the beginnings of social hierarchy. Unlike the fluid leadership of nomadic groups, settled communities began to develop more permanent positions of authority, roles that carried specific responsibilities and privileges. The development of agriculture also changed humanity's relationship with time in fundamental ways. Hunter-gatherers lived largely in the present, responding to immediate needs and opportunities as they arose. Their planning horizon rarely extended beyond the next few days or weeks, but farmers had to think ahead, planning for future seasons, storing seeds for next year's planting, building up reserves for times of scarcity. This forward-thinking mentality required people to develop new cognitive skills and cultural practices that could support long-term planning and delayed gratification. The agricultural calendar became central to community life in ways that had no parallel in nomadic societies. People had to coordinate their activities around planting times, growing seasons, and harvest periods. This required the development of more sophisticated methods for tracking time, leading to the creation of calendars based on careful observation of seasonal changes, lunar cycles, and stellar movements. The ability to predict and plan for seasonal changes became crucial for agricultural success and community survival. Religious and spiritual life also evolved with the shift to agriculture. The cycles of planting, growth, and harvest became central to human experience, leading to the development of agricultural festivals and rituals designed to ensure good crops. Deities associated with fertility, rain, and the seasons became increasingly important, reflecting the new dependence on natural forces that could make the difference between abundance and starvation. The earth itself began to be seen not just as a source of resources to be exploited, but as a partner in the process of creation and sustenance. Agricultural peoples developed elaborate mythologies and ritual practices centered on the relationship between humans and the land, between the cycles of plant growth and death, between the forces of fertility and the mysteries of regeneration. These religious developments would profoundly influence all later civilizations, providing the conceptual foundations for complex theological systems and monumental religious architecture. As agricultural techniques improved and populations grew, the earliest farming communities began to expand and develop into true villages. These settlements, dating from around 8,000 years ago, show evidence of increasingly sophisticated social organization. The transition from small farming communities to larger villages required solutions to new problems of coordination, resource management, and social control that had never before been necessary in human societies. Houses became larger and more elaborate, with specialized areas for different activities. Instead of simple one-room structures that served all purposes, village houses began to include separate areas for sleeping, cooking, storage, and craft production. Some houses had courtyards where domestic animals could be kept, workshops where specialized crafts could be practiced, and storage rooms where surplus grain and other goods could be kept safe from weather and pests. Storage facilities grew more complex, designed to protect grain from moisture, rodents, and theft. The development of effective storage technology was crucial for the success of agricultural communities, since the ability to preserve surplus production from one season to the next made the difference between prosperity and famine. Village storage systems included underground pits lined with stone or clay, above-ground granaries raised on platforms to prevent moisture damage, and large ceramic vessels designed specifically for long-term food storage. Public buildings appeared, structures that served the entire community rather than individual families. These might include meeting halls where community decisions could be made, workshops where specialized crafts could be practiced, or religious buildings where community rituals could be performed. The construction of public buildings required unprecedented levels of cooperation and coordination, as community members had to contribute labor and materials for projects that served collective rather than individual needs. The village of Tel Es-Sawan, located in central Iraq, provides an excellent example of this early village development, dating to around 6,000 years before the present era. This settlement housed several hundred people in well-planned neighborhoods that show clear evidence of deliberate urban planning. The site reveals a level of social organization and technological sophistication that would have been impossible in smaller, less stable communities. The houses were built of mud brick and arranged along streets, with a sophisticated drainage system to manage water flow during seasonal rains and floods. The street layout shows evidence of careful planning, with main thoroughfares connecting different neighborhoods and smaller lanes providing access to individual houses. The drainage system included underground channels that carried wastewater away from living areas, covered drains that prevented the accumulation of standing water, and collection basins where water could be stored for use during dry periods. Large communal storage facilities dominated the center of the village, suggesting a high degree of cooperation and shared resources. These storage complexes were far larger than anything that individual families could have built or filled on their own, indicating that the community had developed systems for pooling resources and managing collective wealth. The size and sophistication of these storage facilities also suggests that the village was producing substantial surpluses that needed to be preserved and managed over extended periods. Perhaps most significantly, Tel Es-Sawan shows evidence of defensive walls and watchtowers that surrounded the entire settlement. This indicates that by this time, villages had accumulated enough wealth to be worth defending, and that conflict between different communities had become a real concern. The presence of these fortifications marks an important transition in human society, from small, relatively egalitarian farming communities to larger, more complex settlements with clear distinctions between insiders and outsiders, between those who belonged and those who might threaten the community's security and prosperity. The defensive architecture at Tel Es-Sawan was sophisticated and well-planned. The walls were built of mud brick reinforced with stone foundations, designed to withstand both natural erosion and human attack. The watchtowers were positioned to provide clear views of the surrounding landscape, allowing sentries to spot approaching dangers while they were still far enough away to allow the community to prepare defenses. Gates were constructed with complex entrance systems that could be easily defended against attackers, while allowing normal traffic to flow in and out of the settlement. The growth of villages also led to new forms of social organization that reflected the increasing complexity of community life. Archaeological evidence suggests that by this time, clear social hierarchies had emerged that went far beyond the simple distinctions between skilled and unskilled individuals that might have existed in smaller communities. Some houses were larger and better constructed than others, containing luxury items like jewelry, fine pottery, and imported materials that indicated their owners had access to resources beyond those available to ordinary community members. Burials show similar distinctions, with some individuals interred with elaborate grave goods, while others received only simple burials with few or no accompanying objects. These burial practices provide clear evidence that social status had become hereditary, passed down from parents to children rather than earned anew by each generation through individual achievement. The emergence of hereditary social classes represents a fundamental change in human social organization, creating permanent distinctions between people that would characterize all later civilizations. The grave goods found in elite burials at sites like Tel Es-Sawan include items that clearly required specialized knowledge and skills to produce. Finely crafted jewelry made from precious metals and stones, elaborate pottery decorated with complex designs, weapons and tools made from materials that had to be imported from distant regions. The presence of these luxury items indicates not only that some individuals had access to greater wealth than others, but also that the community had developed trade relationships with other settlements and regions. The emergence of social stratification was closely linked to the development of craft specialization that went far beyond the simple division of labor that might have existed in smaller communities. As villages grew larger and more prosperous, they could support individuals who devoted themselves entirely to specific crafts, developing levels of skill and expertise that would have been impossible for people who had to divide their time between craft production and food production. Potters became increasingly skilled, creating vessels that were not just functional but beautiful, decorated with complex geometric patterns and stylized representations of animals and plants. The pottery from this period shows clear evidence of artistic traditions that were passed down from master to apprentice, with distinctive styles and techniques that characterized the work of particular communities or regions. Some pottery was clearly made for everyday use, simple and sturdy vessels designed for cooking and storage. But other pieces were obviously created for ceremonial or decorative purposes, showing levels of artistic sophistication that indicate pottery making had become a true art form. Weavers developed new techniques for creating textiles, using fibers from domesticated animals and plants to produce cloth of varying qualities and colors. The development of textile production required not only skill in weaving but also knowledge of how to prepare fibers, how to create dyes from natural materials, and how to design patterns that were both beautiful and meaningful within the cultural context of the community. Evidence from archaeological sites suggests that textile production became increasingly specialized, with some individuals focusing on fiber preparation, others on dyeing, and still others on the actual weaving process. Metalworking emerged as one of the most important specialized crafts, representing a technological breakthrough that would have profound implications for all later civilizations. Initially, people worked with naturally occurring metals like copper, hammering them into simple tools and ornaments. Native copper could be found in some regions in relatively pure form, allowing craftsmen to work with it using techniques similar to those used for working stone or bone. But gradually, craftsmen learned to smelt metal from ore, to create alloys by mixing different metals, and to cast complex shapes using molds. The development of metallurgy required not only new technical skills but also new knowledge about geology, chemistry, and engineering. Metalworkers had to learn to identify ore deposits, to build furnaces that could reach the high temperatures needed for smelting, to create alloys with specific properties for different purposes. The development of metallurgy marked another crucial step toward the complex technologies that would characterize later civilizations. Metal tools were superior to stone tools in almost every way, being sharper, more durable, and capable of being reshaped when damaged. Metal weapons gave military advantages to communities that possessed them, while metal agricultural tools increased farming productivity and efficiency. The control of metal production and trade would become a major source of wealth and power for individuals and communities that mastered these technologies. Trade networks began to develop as villages sought materials that were not available locally. Obsidian from volcanic regions, shells from distant seas, and precious stones from remote mountains found their way into village settlements, evidence of long-distance exchange relationships that connected communities across hundreds or even thousands of miles. These trade networks not only provided access to desired materials, but also facilitated the exchange of ideas, techniques, and cultural practices between different communities. The development of long-distance trade required new forms of social organization and new technologies for transportation and communication. Traders had to be able to travel safely across long distances, often through territories controlled by other communities. This required the development of diplomatic relationships, trade agreements, and systems of protection that could ensure the safety of merchants and their goods. The profits from long-distance trade also created new sources of wealth that could support further specialization and social stratification. The management of these increasingly complex communities required new forms of record-keeping that went far beyond the simple memory-based systems that had been adequate for smaller groups. The earliest systems were simple, perhaps using clay tokens to represent different quantities of grain or animals. These tokens could be used to keep track of stored goods, to record trade transactions, or to document the contributions of different community members to collective projects. But over time, these record-keeping systems became more sophisticated, incorporating more complex symbols and developing standardized conventions that could be understood by different individuals. The clay tokens gradually evolved into more abstract symbols that could represent not just physical objects, but also concepts like ownership, debt, and obligation. This evolution of record-keeping systems laid the groundwork for the development of writing systems that would emerge in later centuries. Religious life in these early villages became increasingly elaborate and institutionalized, reflecting the growing complexity of community social organization. Rather than the informal spiritual practices of nomadic peoples, village communities began to construct specialized religious buildings and to support individuals who devoted themselves primarily to religious activities. These early priests or shamans played crucial roles not just in spiritual matters but in practical community management, often serving as keepers of the calendar, organizers of communal work projects, and mediators in disputes. The religious buildings constructed in early villages were among the first examples of monumental architecture in human history. These structures required the coordinated labor of many community members and represented a significant investment of resources that could have been used for other purposes. The willingness of communities to make such investments in religious architecture indicates the central importance of spiritual life in these early settlements. The development of agriculture and village life also had profound environmental consequences that would accelerate as human populations grew and settlements became larger and more numerous. As human populations grew and farming techniques improved, people began to modify their landscape in increasingly dramatic ways. Forests were cleared for farmland, rivers were diverted for irrigation, and the natural habitats of many wild animals were transformed or destroyed. This environmental modification represented a fundamental change in the relationship between humans and the natural world. Nomadic peoples had lived largely within natural ecosystems, taking what they needed without fundamentally altering the landscape. But agricultural peoples began to reshape their environment to serve human purposes, creating artificial ecosystems that were designed to maximize food production rather than to maintain natural ecological balance. The environmental changes associated with early agriculture were not necessarily destructive, but they were profound and irreversible. The clearing of forests for farmland created new habitats that supported different plant and animal species than had existed before. The construction of irrigation systems altered the flow of rivers and the distribution of water across the landscape. The concentration of human populations in permanent settlements created new environmental pressures that required innovative solutions. By around 5,500 years ago, some villages in Mesopotamia had grown large enough to be considered small towns, supporting populations of several thousand people. These settlements showed all the characteristics that would later define urban civilization: dense populations living in close proximity, complex social hierarchies with multiple levels of status and authority, specialized crafts that required years of training to master, long-distance trade, networks that connected distant regions, formal religious institutions with professional clergy, and sophisticated technologies that gave humans unprecedented control over their environment. The transition from simple farming villages to these proto-urban centers represented another crucial step in the development of civilization that required solutions to entirely new categories of problems. It required new forms of organization that could coordinate the activities of thousands rather than hundreds of people, new technologies that could support larger populations in smaller areas, and new ways of thinking about human relationships and social responsibility that could maintain order, and cooperation in communities too large for everyone to know everyone else personally. The surplus production that made these larger settlements possible also created new challenges that had never before existed in human societies. How could the activities of thousands of people be organized and coordinated effectively? How could order be maintained and conflicts resolved in communities where traditional kinship-based authority structures were no longer adequate? How could resources be distributed fairly while still providing incentives for innovation and hard work? How could communities protect themselves against both internal disorder and external threats? The solutions that emerged to these challenges would form the foundation of Sumerian civilization and would influence all later civilizations. Systems of law and government that could maintain order in large communities. Formal educational institutions that could preserve and transmit knowledge across generations. Professional armies that could defend against external threats. And monumental architecture that could express community, identity, and values all had their roots in the practical problems faced by these early towns. The scribes who kept records of grain storage and trade transactions would eventually create the world's first literature, developing writing systems that could preserve not just practical information, but also stories, poems, and religious texts that express the deepest values and beliefs of their communities. The priests who organized community festivals would build the first temples, creating architectural monuments that would inspire awe and devotion while serving as centers of learning and cultural preservation. The craftsmen who made tools and pottery would develop the technologies that would transform human capabilities, creating new materials and techniques that would give humans unprecedented power to shape their environment. The traders who established long-distance exchange networks would create the economic foundations for urban civilization, generating the wealth that could support large populations and complex social institutions. The story of early technology development in these proto-urban centers reveals the remarkable ingenuity and creativity of our ancestors, who solved complex technical problems with limited resources and no precedents to guide them. The potter's wheel, invented around 5,000 years ago, revolutionized ceramic production, allowing craftsmen to create vessels that were both more beautiful and more functional than anything made by hand. This seemingly simple device required sophisticated understanding of physics and engineering, as well as considerable skill to operate effectively. The development of the wheel for transportation followed shortly after, transforming the movement of goods and people across long distances. The invention of the wheel was not simply a matter of observing that round objects roll easily. It required the development of axles, bearings, and other mechanical components that could withstand the stresses of heavy loads and rough terrain. The wheel also required the construction of roads and paths that could accommodate wheeled vehicles, representing a major investment in infrastructure that could only be justified by communities that had substantial resources to devote to such projects. Irrigation technology became increasingly sophisticated as communities learned to control and direct water flow with greater precision and efficiency. Simple canals gave way to complex systems of dikes, reservoirs, and distribution channels that could bring water to fields many miles from the nearest river. These irrigation systems required careful planning, coordinated labor, and ongoing maintenance, all of which contributed to the development of more complex forms of social organization and technical expertise. The engineering challenges involved in large-scale irrigation were formidable and required innovations in surveying, construction, and water management that pushed the boundaries of existing knowledge. Engineers had to calculate water flow rates, design channels that could carry water efficiently over long distances, and create distribution systems that could deliver water to individual fields as needed. The construction of these systems required the coordinated labor of hundreds or thousands of workers, as well as sophisticated project management capabilities. The invention of the sailboat allowed communities to extend their trade networks along rivers and eventually into the Persian Gulf, opening up new possibilities for cultural and economic exchange. Maritime technology required not only knowledge of boat construction, but also understanding of winds, currents, and navigation techniques that could guide vessels safely across open water. The development of sailing technology brought distant communities into contact with one another and accelerated the spread of innovations and ideas. Perhaps most importantly, the development of more sophisticated tools and weapons gave human communities greater control over their environment and greater ability to defend themselves against both natural disasters and human enemies. Bronze tools, created by alloying copper with tin, were stronger and more durable than anything made from stone or pure copper. The development of bronze technology required not only metallurgical skills, but also trade networks that could provide access to tin, which was much rarer than copper and had to be imported from distant regions. Bronze weapons gave military advantages to communities that possessed them, creating new dynamics of power and conflict that would shape political development for centuries to come. Bronze agricultural tools increased farming productivity and efficiency, allowing farmers to cultivate larger areas and to work the soil more effectively. The superior performance of bronze tools and weapons created strong incentives for communities to develop metallurgical capabilities and to establish trade relationships that could provide access to the necessary raw materials. The accumulation of technological innovations, combined with growing populations and increasing social complexity, set the stage for the emergence of the world's first true cities. These urban centers would represent yet another revolutionary transformation in human society, creating new possibilities for human achievement, while also generating new challenges and conflicts that would shape the course of history for millennia to come. As we trace this remarkable journey from nomadic hunting and gathering to settled village life, we see the gradual emergence of all the elements that would characterize later civilizations, agriculture and animal domestication, that provided the economic foundation for settled life. Permanent settlements that allowed for the accumulation of knowledge and resources, social hierarchies that organized communities according to status and function, craft specialization that created new technologies and artistic traditions, long-distance trade that connected distant communities, formal, religious institutions that provided social cohesion and cultural meaning, sophisticated technologies that gave humans greater control over their environment, and complex forms of social organization that could coordinate the activities of large numbers of people. Each of these developments built upon previous innovations, creating a cumulative process of change that accelerated over time and created positive feedback loops that drove further innovation and complexity. Agricultural surplus made possible the support of craft specialists, whose innovations increased agricultural productivity and created new trade opportunities. Trade networks facilitated the exchange of ideas and technologies, which led to further innovations and increased productivity. Social stratification created incentives for technological and artistic achievement, while providing the organizational structures needed to coordinate large-scale projects. The people who lived through these transformations could hardly have imagined where their innovations would lead or understood the historical significance of the changes they were creating. The farmer who first deliberately planted seeds probably thought only of feeding his family through the next winter, not of launching an agricultural revolution that would transform human civilization. The craftsman who first mixed copper with tin to create bronze was likely focused on making a better tool for immediate use, not on creating a new technology that would give military advantages to entire societies. The priest who first organized a harvest festival probably intended simply to ensure the community's continued prosperity through divine favor, not to establish religious institutions that would shape human thought for thousands of years. The trader who first carried goods from one community to another was likely motivated by immediate profit, not by the vision of creating trade networks that would connect civilizations across continents. Yet these individual acts of creativity and innovation, repeated across generations and communities, created the foundation for human civilization as we know it. The surplus production that agriculture made possible freed some individuals to specialize in other activities, creating the conditions for technological and cultural development. The permanent settlements that farming enabled allowed for the accumulation of knowledge, tools, and wealth that could be passed down from generation to generation and built upon over time. The social organization that village life required provided the structure within which larger and more complex societies could develop, creating systems of authority and cooperation that could coordinate the activities of thousands of people. The technological innovations that emerged from craft specialization gave humans greater control over their environment and greater capacity for both creation and destruction, fundamentally altering the relationship between humanity and the natural world. The trade networks that connected distant communities facilitated the exchange of ideas as well as goods, accelerating the pace of cultural and technological change and creating the first truly international relationships in human history. The religious institutions that developed to serve settled communities provided both social cohesion and intellectual frameworks for understanding the world, creating the conceptual foundations for philosophy, science, and art. All of these developments would reach their full flowering in the great cities of Sumer, where human creativity and organization would achieve new heights of sophistication and complexity that would establish patterns and precedents that continue to influence human society today. The agricultural villages of early Mesopotamia were the seeds from which the first urban civilization would grow, creating innovations and institutions that would influence human society for thousands of years to come. The legacy of this agricultural revolution extends far beyond the ancient world and continues to shape human life in fundamental ways. The basic pattern of settled life, surplus production, and social specialization that emerged in these early farming communities remains the foundation of human society today, even in our modern technological age. Our modern cities, with all their complexity and sophistication, are the direct descendants of those first permanent settlements along the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The challenges that these early communities faced in organizing large numbers of people, distributing resources fairly, maintaining order while encouraging innovation, and balancing individual needs with community welfare remain central concerns of human society today. The solutions they developed, including systems of law and government, formal education, professional specialization, and institutional religion, continue to shape our world in fundamental ways, even as they have evolved and adapted to changing circumstances over thousands of years. Understanding this early period of human development helps us appreciate both how far we have come and how much we owe to the innovations and insights of our ancestors. The transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture and settled life was not just a change in how people made their living, but a transformation in how they understood themselves and their place in the world. It created the possibility for human societies of unprecedented size, complexity, and achievement, setting the stage for all the civilizations that would follow and establishing the foundations upon which all subsequent human progress would be built. The transformation of human society from scattered agricultural villages to the world's first true cities represents one of the most remarkable achievements in human history. Around 4,000 years before the Common Era, along the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something unprecedented began to emerge from the landscape of small farming communities that had dotted southern Mesopotamia for centuries. These were not merely larger villages or expanded settlements, but entirely new forms of human organization that would fundamentally reshape civilization itself. The emergence of these first cities was not a sudden event, but rather the culmination of centuries of gradual development and innovation. The fertile alluvial soil deposited by the annual flooding of the great rivers had created agricultural conditions of unprecedented productivity, allowing farming communities to generate surpluses that had never before been possible in human history. These surpluses freed some members of society from the constant demands of food production, enabling them to pursue specialized occupations that would become the foundation of urban civilization. The process of urbanization required revolutionary changes in how human societies organized themselves, managed resources, and coordinated collective activities. Villages that had functioned effectively with informal leadership and customary practices found themselves inadequate to handle the complexities of larger populations and more diverse economic activities. New forms of governance, administration, and social organization had to be developed to manage the unprecedented challenges and opportunities that urban life presented. The city of Uruk stands as perhaps the most spectacular example of this urban revolution. By 3,500 years before the Common Era, Uruk had grown to encompass an area of more than 2.5 square miles, with a population that may have reached 50,000 inhabitants. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, we must remember that just a few centuries earlier, the largest human settlements had housed perhaps a few hundred people at most. Uruk represented a quantum leap in the scale of human organization, requiring entirely new approaches to governance, resource management, and social coordination. The growth of Uruk was not simply a matter of more people living in the same place, but represented a fundamental transformation in the nature of human community. The city brought together people from diverse backgrounds, occupations, and social positions in ways that created entirely new forms of social interaction and cultural exchange. Farmers from the surrounding countryside mingled with specialized craftsmen, merchants from distant lands, religious officials, government administrators, and countless others whose livelihoods depended on the complex web of relationships that urban life made possible. Walking through the streets of ancient Uruk would have been an overwhelming sensory experience for someone accustomed to village life. The narrow lanes bustled with activity from dawn to dusk, filled with merchants hawking their wares, craftsmen working at their trades, and citizens going about their daily business. The air would have been thick with the sounds of commerce and industry, the clatter of pottery wheels, the ring of metal on metal from smithies, and the constant hum of human conversation in multiple languages and dialects as traders from distant lands mingled with local residents. The smells of the city would have been equally intense and diverse, ranging from the appetizing aromas of food being prepared in countless kitchens and market stalls, to the less pleasant odors of industrial activities, animal husbandry, and the inevitable waste products of dense human habitation. The visual landscape would have presented a kaleidoscope of colors, textures, and forms, as people dressed in clothing from many different regions and social classes moved through streets lined with buildings of varying sizes, styles, and functions. The physical structure of Uruk reflected the complexity of urban life in ways that would have been impossible in smaller communities. Massive mud brick walls, some of the first urban fortifications in human history, enclosed the city and provided protection for its inhabitants. These walls were not merely defensive structures, but symbols of civic identity and collective achievement, representing the coordinated effort of thousands of people working toward a common goal. The construction of such monuments required sophisticated planning, resource allocation, and labor management that went far beyond anything attempted in earlier human societies. The engineering challenges involved in building and maintaining these massive fortifications pushed the boundaries of human technical knowledge and organizational capability. The walls had to be designed to withstand both natural forces such as floods and earthquakes and human threats such as military attacks and siege warfare. The construction required careful coordination of material procurement, labor management, and construction scheduling that demonstrated remarkable advances in project management and engineering expertise. Within the city walls, different districts served specialized functions in ways that reflected the increasing complexity of urban life. Residential areas housed families in multi-story dwellings that were far more sophisticated than the simple structures of farming villages. These homes often featured multiple rooms, interior courtyards, and elaborate drainage systems that demonstrated advanced understanding of urban planning and public health. The wealthy districts contained elaborate mansions with decorated walls and sophisticated amenities, while working-class neighborhoods featured more modest but still substantial dwellings that provided comfort and security for their inhabitants. The design and construction of urban housing reflected careful consideration of the practical challenges posed by dense population concentrations. Buildings had to be constructed to maximize the use of limited space while also providing adequate light, ventilation, and privacy for their inhabitants. The development of multi-story construction techniques allowed cities to accommodate larger populations within their protective walls, while also creating opportunities for architectural innovation and aesthetic expression that enriched the urban environment. The commercial districts of Uruk buzzed with economic activity that would have been unimaginable in earlier periods. Specialized markets sold everything from basic foodstuffs to luxury goods imported from distant lands. Workshops and manufacturing centers produced pottery, textiles, metalwork, and other goods, not just for local consumption, but for trade throughout the known world. The scale and sophistication of this economic activity required new forms of organization and management that laid the foundations for all subsequent commercial development. The emergence of specialized markets represented a revolutionary development in human economic organization. Rather than the simple barter systems that had characterized village economies, urban markets featured complex networks of exchange that involved multiple intermediaries, standardized measures and currencies, and sophisticated systems of credit and debt. These markets brought together producers and consumers from vast geographic areas, creating economic relationships that spanned hundreds or even thousands of miles. The manufacturing activities that developed in urban centers achieved levels of specialization and technical sophistication that had never before been possible. Craftsmen could devote their entire careers to perfecting particular skills and techniques, leading to dramatic improvements in the quality and variety of manufactured goods. The concentration of skilled workers in urban environments also facilitated the exchange of knowledge and techniques that accelerated the pace of technological innovation and artistic development. Perhaps most impressive of all were the monumental structures that dominated the urban landscape and served as focal points for civic and religious life. The Great Ziggurat of Uruk, a massive stepped pyramid that rose high above the surrounding buildings, represented one of humanity's first attempts at monumental architecture. The structure was not merely a building but a statement about human ambition and capability, demonstrating that people could work together to create something that transcended the practical needs of daily survival and reached toward higher aspirations. The construction of such monuments required not only massive amounts of labor and materials, but also sophisticated engineering knowledge and project management skills. The builders of the Uruk Ziggurat had to solve complex problems of structural engineering, materials science, and logistics that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge and capability. The fact that these structures have survived for thousands of years testifies to the skill and dedication of their creators and the advanced understanding of construction techniques that they had developed. The symbolic significance of these monumental structures extended far beyond their practical functions as religious centers or administrative headquarters. They served as visible expressions of civic pride and collective achievement that helped to forge shared identity among urban populations. The very existence of such monuments demonstrated the prosperity and organizational capability of the cities that built them, serving as advertisements of urban achievement that influenced the development of surrounding regions and competing urban centers. The emergence of cities like Uruk was paralleled by similar developments at other sites throughout southern Mesopotamia. The city of Ur, located near the Persian Gulf, became another major urban center that rivaled Uruk in size and importance. Ur developed its own distinctive character and specializations while sharing the basic urban characteristics that defined this new form of human settlement. The city became famous for its sophisticated craftsmanship, particularly in metalworking and jewelry making, and served as a major center for trade with distant regions. The development of multiple urban centers created opportunities for both competition and cooperation that accelerated the pace of innovation and cultural development throughout the region. Cities competed with one another for trade advantages, skilled workers, and political influence, spurring each to achieve higher levels of prosperity and sophistication. At the same time, the cities shared knowledge, techniques, and cultural innovations that benefited the entire region and contributed to the rapid advancement of urban civilization. The royal cemetery of Ur, discovered by archaeologists in the 20th century, revealed the extraordinary wealth and sophistication that had developed in these early cities. The elaborate burial goods found in the tombs, including intricate golden artifacts, sophisticated musical instruments, and complex ceremonial objects, demonstrated a level of artistic achievement and cultural refinement that surpassed anything known from earlier periods. These discoveries showed that urban life had not only created new forms of economic and political organization, but it also fostered unprecedented developments in art, craftsmanship, and cultural expression. The artifacts recovered from the royal cemetery provide remarkable insights into the daily life, beliefs, and values of early urban civilization. The quality and variety of the burial goods demonstrate the existence of highly skilled craftsmen who had access to raw materials from distant regions and possessed technical knowledge that enabled them to create works of extraordinary beauty and sophistication. The presence of such elaborate grave goods also indicates the development of complex social hierarchies and belief systems that assigned great importance to status, wealth, and proper preparation for the afterlife. Life in these early cities was governed by complex social hierarchies that reflected the specialized nature of urban society. At the top of the social pyramid were the rulers and their families, who lived in elaborate palaces and controlled vast resources. These leaders were not merely the most powerful individuals in their communities, but served as focal points for civic identity and collective action. They coordinated the massive public works projects that defined urban life, managed the complex economic relationships that sustained the cities, and represented their communities in dealings with other urban centers. The emergence of formal political leadership represented a significant departure from the more egalitarian social structures that had characterized village life. Urban rulers possessed authority and resources that enabled them to make decisions affecting thousands of people and to coordinate activities on a scale that had never before been attempted. This concentration of power created both opportunities for remarkable achievements and challenges related to the proper use and limitation of political authority. Below the ruling elite were various classes of professionals, craftsmen, merchants, and other specialists who formed the backbone of urban society. These individuals possessed skills and knowledge that were essential to the functioning of city life, but were often highly specialized and required years of training to master. The existence of such specialized roles represented a fundamental departure from village life, where most people were involved in agricultural production and possessed similar sets of skills and knowledge. The professional classes that emerged in urban environments created new forms of social identity and economic relationship that had no precedent in earlier human societies. Professional craftsmen, for example, developed guild-like organizations that protected their interests, maintained quality standards, and transmitted specialized knowledge to new generations. These professional associations became important elements of urban social structure, providing their members with economic security and social status while also contributing to the overall prosperity and sophistication of urban life. The working classes of these early cities included laborers, servants, and others who provided the manual labor necessary to sustain urban life. While these individuals may not have enjoyed the same privileges as the elite, they were nevertheless part of a complex social system that provided them with security, community, and opportunities for advancement that would have been impossible in smaller settlements. The very existence of such diverse social roles demonstrated the prosperity and complexity that urban life had made possible. Even among the working classes, urban life created opportunities for specialization and advancement that had not existed in village societies. Skilled laborers could develop expertise in particular areas of work that made them valuable to employers and provided pathways for economic and social mobility. The concentration of diverse economic activities in urban environments meant that ambitious individuals could find niches where their particular talents and interests could be developed and rewarded. Urban life also created entirely new categories of people who had no equivalent in village society. Professional soldiers defended the cities and enforced the will of the rulers, while scribes and administrators managed the complex record-keeping and bureaucratic functions that urban life required. Religious specialists served the elaborate temples and conducted the ceremonies that played central roles in civic life. All of these roles required specialized training and knowledge that could only be developed and sustained in urban environments. The emergence of professional military forces represented a particularly significant development in human social organization. Unlike the informal militia that might defend a village in times of crisis, Urban armies were composed of individuals whose primary occupation was warfare and who possessed specialized training, equipment, and organizational structures that made them far more effective than amateur fighters. The existence of such professional forces both reflected and contributed to the increasing complexity and sophistication of urban society. The economic foundations of urban life rested on agricultural surplus production in the surrounding countryside, combined with sophisticated systems of trade and manufacturing that extended far beyond local communities. The cities served as collection and distribution centers for agricultural products from the surrounding region, concentrating wealth and resources in ways that made possible the elaborate public works and cultural achievements that defined urban civilization. This concentration of resources also created the economic foundation for the specialized crafts and industries that flourished in urban environments. The relationship between cities and their agricultural hinterlands was complex and mutually beneficial, though not always equal in terms of power and influence. Cities provided markets for agricultural products, manufactured goods that rural communities needed, and protection from external threats. In return, the countryside supplied the food surpluses that made urban life possible, as well as raw materials for urban industries and labor for urban construction projects. Trade relationships connected these early cities to distant regions in ways that had never before been possible in human history. Merchants from Sumerian cities traveled hundreds of miles to obtain raw materials and luxury goods that were not available locally, establishing commercial networks that spanned much of the known world. These trading relationships brought new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences into the cities, contributing to the rapid pace of innovation and development that characterized early urban civilization. The development of long-distance trade required innovations in transportation, communication, and financial organization that pushed the boundaries of human capability. Merchants had to develop reliable methods for moving goods across vast distances, often through dangerous or difficult terrain. They needed systems for communicating with trading partners and coordinating complex transactions across time and space. They also required financial instruments and institutions that could manage the risks and complexities of long-distance commerce. The management of these complex economic relationships required new forms of organization and record-keeping that pushed the boundaries of human administrative capability. Urban administrators had to track vast quantities of goods, manage complex distribution systems, and coordinate the activities of hundreds or thousands of individuals involved in various aspects of economic production and exchange. The development of these administrative systems laid the groundwork for all subsequent advances in governance and management. The emergence of sophisticated administrative systems represented one of the most important innovations of early urban civilization. These systems required the development of standardized procedures, record-keeping methods, and organizational structures that could handle the complexity and scale of urban economic and political life. The administrators who managed these systems became important professional classes in their own right, possessing specialized knowledge and skills that were essential to the functioning of urban society. As these early cities grew and prospered, they began to influence and interact with one another in ways that created even greater complexity and sophistication. Competition between cities spurred innovation and achievement as each community sought to outdo its rivals in wealth, power, and cultural accomplishment. At the same time, cooperation between cities in matters of trade, defense, and cultural exchange created larger networks of interaction that accelerated the pace of development throughout the region. The interactions between urban centers created the first examples of what we might recognize as international relations, involving diplomatic negotiations, trade agreements, military alliances, and cultural exchanges that operated on a scale far beyond anything that had existed in the village world. These relationships required new forms of communication, negotiation, and conflict resolution that established precedents for all subsequent developments in interstate relations. The military aspects of urban life represented another area of unprecedented innovation and complexity. The concentration of wealth and population in cities made them attractive targets for raiders and conquerors, while also providing the resources necessary to organize effective defense. Urban warfare required new strategies, technologies, and forms of organization that went far beyond the simple conflicts that might have occurred between villages or tribal groups. The development of urban military technology included innovations in weapons, fortifications, and siege techniques that represented significant advances in human engineering and tactical thinking. The need to defend large populations and valuable resources against determined attackers drove rapid innovation in military technology and strategy, leading to arms races between competing urban centers that accelerated the pace of technological development. The development of professional military forces represented a significant departure from earlier forms of conflict resolution and community defense. These soldiers were not simply farmers or craftsmen who took up arms when necessary, but individuals whose primary occupation was warfare and who possessed specialized training and equipment that made them far more effective than amateur fighters. The existence of such professional forces both reflected and contributed to the increasing complexity and sophistication of urban society. The organization and training of professional armies required institutional structures and resources that could only be sustained by urban societies. Military training facilities, weapons manufacturing centers, and supply systems all required significant investments of time, labor, and materials that were beyond the capabilities of smaller communities. The development of these military institutions became important elements of urban society, influencing political structures, economic activities, and social relationships in fundamental ways. The cultural life of these early cities flourished in ways that would have been impossible in smaller communities. The concentration of wealth and population created audiences for elaborate forms of entertainment and artistic expression that required significant resources and specialized skills to produce. Musicians, storytellers, dancers, and other performers developed their crafts to unprecedented levels of sophistication, creating cultural traditions that would influence human artistic expression for thousands of years to come. The patronage system that developed in urban environments provided crucial support for artistic and cultural development. Wealthy individuals, religious institutions, and political authorities commissioned works of art, sponsored performances, and supported artists and craftsmen in ways that enabled them to devote their full attention to creative activities. This patronage system created opportunities for artistic innovation and achievement that had never before existed in human society. Religious life in urban environments took on new dimensions of complexity and grandeur that reflected the resources and organizational capabilities of city-states. The great temples that dominated urban landscapes were not merely places of worship, but served as centers for community life, economic activity, and cultural expression. These institutions employed hundreds of people in various capacities, from priests and religious specialists to craftsmen, administrators, and laborers who maintained the complex operations that temple life required. The temples of early cities functioned as multi-purpose institutions that combined religious, economic, educational, and cultural functions in ways that made them central to urban life. They served as banks and lending institutions, schools and libraries, art galleries and performance venues, as well as centers for worship and spiritual guidance. The complexity and sophistication of temple operations required administrative systems and professional expertise that contributed significantly to the overall development of urban civilization. The rituals and ceremonies conducted in urban temples were elaborate affairs that involved entire communities and demonstrated the wealth and sophistication that urban life had made possible. These events served not only religious functions but also reinforced social bonds, displayed civic pride, and provided opportunities for artistic and cultural expression that enriched the lives of all participants. The complexity and grandeur of urban religious life represented a significant evolution from the simpler spiritual practices of village communities. The development of elaborate religious ceremonies required innovations in music, dance, visual arts, and dramatic performance that pushed the boundaries of human creative expression. These ceremonies brought together large numbers of participants in coordinated activities that required careful planning, extensive rehearsal, and sophisticated organizational skills. The staging of such events became an important aspect of urban cultural life, providing opportunities for community participation and artistic achievement that enriched the lives of all participants. The intellectual life of these early cities fostered innovations in human thinking and knowledge that laid the foundations for all subsequent intellectual development. The concentration of educated individuals in urban environments created opportunities for the exchange of ideas and the development of new forms of knowledge that would have been impossible in smaller, more isolated communities. Urban scholars and thinkers had access to resources, information, and intellectual stimulation that enabled them to push the boundaries of human understanding in unprecedented ways. The development of formal educational institutions in urban environments represented a crucial innovation that enabled the systematic transmission of knowledge and skills across generations. These schools and training centers provided instruction not only in practical skills such as reading, writing, and mathematics, but also in more abstract areas of knowledge such as philosophy, theology, and natural science. The existence of such institutions created opportunities for intellectual development and cultural advancement that had never before been available to human societies. As urban civilization matured and spread throughout Mesopotamia, it began to influence surrounding regions and peoples in ways that extended its impact far beyond the original city-states. Neighboring communities adopted urban technologies, governmental systems, and cultural practices, spreading the innovations of city life throughout the ancient world. This process of cultural diffusion ensured that the achievements of early urban civilization would have lasting impact on human development. The influence of early urban civilization extended through multiple channels, including trade relationships, military conquest, voluntary adoption of urban practices, and the migration of skilled individuals who carried urban knowledge and techniques to new regions. This process of diffusion was not simply a matter of imposing urban ways on rural populations, but involved complex processes of adaptation and modification that created new forms of civilization that combined urban innovations with local traditions and conditions. The transition from village to urban life represented far more than simply a change in the size of human settlements. It marked a fundamental transformation in how people understood themselves, their relationships with one another, and their place in the world. Urban life created new possibilities for human achievement and expression, while also presenting new challenges and complexities that required innovative solutions and approaches. The psychological and social adjustments required by urban life were as significant as the technological and organizational innovations that made cities possible. People had to learn to live in close proximity with large numbers of strangers, to navigate complex social hierarchies and institutional structures, and to find meaning and identity in environments that were far more diverse and impersonal than the village communities from which they came. The legacy of these first cities extends far beyond their immediate historical context and continues to influence human society in fundamental ways. The basic patterns of urban organization, specialized economic production, complex social hierarchies, and institutional governance that emerged in places like Uruk and Ur established templates that have guided human social development ever since. Modern cities, despite all their technological sophistication and contemporary characteristics, still reflect many of the basic organizational principles that were first developed in ancient Mesopotamia. Understanding the emergence of urban civilization helps us appreciate both the remarkable achievements of our ancestors and the continuities that connect ancient and modern human societies. The challenges that the first city dwellers faced in creating livable, prosperous, and sustainable urban communities remain relevant today as we continue to grapple with issues of urban planning, resource management, social organization, and community development. The solutions they developed, while adapted to their specific circumstances and technological capabilities, offer insights and inspiration that remain valuable in our contemporary world. The development of writing systems represents one of the most revolutionary achievements of early urban civilization, fundamentally transforming human communication and knowledge preservation in ways that continue to shape our world today. The invention of writing was not a sudden breakthrough, but rather the culmination of centuries of development in record-keeping and symbolic representation that had been evolving alongside the growth of urban complexity and administrative needs. The precursors to writing can be traced back to simple token systems that were used in pre-urban communities to keep track of goods, transactions, and other important information. These tokens, often made of clay and shaped to represent different commodities or quantities, provided a physical means of recording information that could be stored and retrieved as needed. As communities grew larger and their economic activities became more complex, these token systems evolved to accommodate increasingly sophisticated record-keeping requirements. The earliest forms of Sumerian writing emerged around 3,200 years before the Common Era in response to the practical demands of urban administration and commerce. As cities grew larger and more complex, the traditional methods of keeping track of goods, transactions, and administrative decisions through memory and simple physical tokens became increasingly inadequate. Urban administrators needed reliable ways to record complex information that could be stored, retrieved, and verified over long periods of time. The transition from token-based record-keeping to true writing represented a conceptual breakthrough that required fundamental changes in how people thought about the relationship between symbols and meaning. Rather than using physical objects to represent specific quantities of particular goods, Writing systems used abstract symbols that could represent not only concrete objects but also actions, qualities, relationships, and abstract concepts. This shift from concrete to abstract representation opened up entirely new possibilities for human communication and thought. The development of writing began with simple pictographic symbols that represented concrete objects and concepts in straightforward, recognizable ways. A drawing of a sheep represented sheep, a drawing of grain represented grain, and so forth. These early symbols were carved into clay tablets using reed styluses, creating permanent records that could be stored and consulted as needed. The choice of clay as a writing medium was particularly fortuitous, as it was readily available, easy to work with when wet, and became extremely durable when dried or fired. The process of creating clay tablets involved sophisticated techniques that required considerable skill and experience to master. Scribes had to prepare the clay to exactly the right consistency, ensuring that it was soft enough to take clear impressions from the stylus, but firm enough to hold its shape during the writing process. The tablets then had to be carefully dried or fired to create permanent records that could withstand handling and storage over long periods of time. As the needs of urban administration became more sophisticated, the writing system evolved to represent increasingly abstract concepts and complex relationships. The pictographic symbols gradually became more stylized and conventional, developing into the characteristic wedge-shaped marks that we know as cuneiform writing. This evolution from representational pictures to abstract symbols marked a crucial step in the development of human communication, as it allowed writers to represent not just concrete objects, but also actions, qualities, relationships, and abstract ideas. The development of cuneiform writing required innovations in both the physical techniques of writing and the conceptual frameworks for organizing and representing information. Scribes had to develop standardized ways of forming the wedge-shaped marks that made up the writing system, ensuring that their writing would be legible to other readers. They also had to create systematic approaches to organizing information on tablets, developing conventions for layout, spacing, and formatting that made written texts easier to read and understand. The expansion of writing beyond simple record-keeping into more complex forms of communication opened up entirely new possibilities for human expression and knowledge preservation. Scribes began to use writing to record laws, contracts, historical events, religious texts, and eventually literature and poetry. This development marked the beginning of recorded history in the truest sense, as human societies could now preserve detailed accounts of their experiences, achievements, and cultural developments for future generations. The ability to preserve information in written form had profound implications for the accumulation and transmission of human knowledge. Previous generations had relied on oral tradition to pass down important information, but this method was subject to the limitations of human memory and the inevitable changes that occur when information is transmitted from person to person over time. Writing provided a means of preserving information in exact form, enabling the accumulation of knowledge across generations in ways that had never before been possible. The profession of scribe became one of the most important and respected occupations in Sumerian society, requiring years of training and education to master the complex writing system and its various applications. Scribes were not merely clerks or record keepers, but served as the intellectual backbone of urban civilization, responsible for maintaining the written knowledge that made complex society possible. They worked in temples, palaces, and commercial establishments, managing the flow of information that kept urban society functioning effectively. The training required to become a competent scribe was extensive and demanding, involving not only the mastery of writing techniques, but also education in mathematics, law, literature, and other subjects that were considered essential for educated individuals. Scribal education typically began in childhood and continued for many years, with students progressing through increasingly sophisticated levels of instruction as they developed their skills and knowledge. The education of scribes took place in specialized schools that represented some of humanity's first formal educational institutions. These schools developed sophisticated curricula that included not only the technical skills of reading and writing, but also mathematics, law, religion, literature, and other subjects that were considered essential for educated individuals. The existence of such schools marked a significant development in human society, as it represented a systematic approach to knowledge transmission that went far beyond the informal learning that had characterized earlier periods. The scribal schools of ancient Sumer were remarkable institutions that combined practical training with intellectual development in ways that created highly educated professionals who could serve the complex needs of urban society. Students in these schools learned not only how to read and write, but also how to think critically, solve problems, and communicate effectively. The graduates of these schools became the administrators, scholars, and cultural leaders who guided the development of Sumerian civilization. The impact of literacy on Sumerian society extended far beyond the practical benefits of improved record-keeping and administration. The ability to read and write created new forms of social distinction and professional opportunity, while also enabling the development of more sophisticated forms of cultural expression and intellectual activity. Literate individuals had access to accumulated knowledge and wisdom that was preserved in written texts, allowing them to build upon the achievements of previous generations in ways that had never before been possible. The development of a literate class in Sumerian society created new forms of social stratification and professional specialization that had profound implications for the organization and development of urban civilization. Literacy became a mark of education and social status that opened doors to prestigious occupations and positions of authority. At the same time, the existence of written records and legal codes created new forms of accountability and institutional structure that influenced the development of government and administration. One of the most remarkable achievements of Sumerian literature was the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest known works of literature. This epic poem tells the story of Gilgamesh, a legendary king of Uruk, and his adventures and quests for immortality. The epic explores themes of friendship, mortality, heroism, and the human condition that remain relevant and compelling today, demonstrating the sophisticated literary sensibility that had developed in Sumerian culture. The Epic of Gilgamesh represents far more than simply an entertaining story, serving multiple important functions in Sumerian society and culture. The epic preserved cultural memory and historical traditions, connecting contemporary Sumerians with their legendary past and providing a sense of continuity and identity that strengthened social bonds. It also provided moral and philosophical instruction, exploring fundamental questions about human nature, social responsibility, and the meaning of life that helped individuals and communities understand their place in the world. The literary techniques employed in the Epic of Gilgamesh demonstrate remarkable sophistication in narrative structure, character development, and thematic exploration. The epic uses complex literary devices such as parallel episodes, symbolic imagery, and dramatic irony to create a rich and multi-layered narrative that rewards careful reading and interpretation. These techniques show that Sumerian writers had developed sophisticated understanding of how to create effective and compelling literature that could engage readers on multiple levels. The Epic of Gilgamesh was not simply entertainment, but served multiple functions in Sumerian society. It preserved cultural memory and historical traditions, provided moral and philosophical instruction, and offered a means for people to explore and understand fundamental questions about human existence and purpose. The epic's enduring appeal and influence on subsequent literature throughout the ancient world testifies to the power and sophistication of Sumerian literary achievement. Beyond the Epic of Gilgamesh, Sumerian literature included a rich variety of other works, including hymns, prayers, wisdom literature, historical chronicles, and legal texts. These works provide invaluable insights into Sumerian culture, values, beliefs, and daily life, while also demonstrating the remarkable literary sophistication that urban civilization had fostered. The preservation of this literature through the medium of writing ensured that Sumerian cultural achievements would influence subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. The diversity and sophistication of Sumerian literature reflects the complex and varied nature of urban society itself. Different types of texts serve different functions and audiences, from practical legal documents that governed commercial and administrative activities to sophisticated literary works that explored philosophical and spiritual themes. This variety demonstrates the richness and complexity of Sumerian intellectual life and the important role that written culture played in urban civilization. The development of written law codes represented another crucial application of writing technology that had profound implications for human society. The famous Code of Hammurabi, though slightly later than the earliest Sumerian legal texts, exemplifies the way that writing enabled the creation of comprehensive, systematic approaches to law and justice that could be applied consistently across large populations and extended periods of time. The development of written legal codes represented a revolutionary advance in human approaches to justice and social organization. Previous legal systems had relied primarily on oral tradition, customary practice, and the personal judgment of leaders or elders to resolve disputes and maintain social order. While these approaches could work effectively in small communities where everyone knew one another and shared common traditions, they became increasingly inadequate as societies grew larger and more complex. Written laws provided several important advantages over traditional oral legal traditions. They created permanent, unchanging standards that could be consulted and applied consistently by judges and administrators. They made legal principles accessible to a broader population, as anyone who could read could understand their rights and obligations under the law. They also enabled the development of more complex and sophisticated legal concepts that could be precisely defined and systematically organized. The process of creating written legal codes required careful consideration of fundamental questions about justice, social organization, and the proper role of government in human affairs. Legal scholars had to think systematically about different types of crimes and disputes, appropriate punishments and remedies, and the procedures that should be followed in legal proceedings. This process of systematic legal thinking laid the foundations for all subsequent developments in jurisprudence and legal philosophy. The existence of written legal codes also contributed to the development of more sophisticated governmental institutions and administrative practices. Written laws required trained legal professionals who could interpret and apply them, leading to the emergence of judges, lawyers, and other legal specialists who formed important parts of urban society. The administration of written legal systems also required bureaucratic institutions that could maintain records, process cases, and ensure that legal decisions were properly implemented and enforced. The religious applications of writing technology were equally significant in shaping Sumerian culture and society. Temples became major centers of literary production, preserving religious texts, hymns, prayers, and theological writings that codified and transmitted religious knowledge and practice. The ability to record religious texts in permanent form enabled the development of more sophisticated theological concepts and more elaborate ritual practices that could be preserved and transmitted accurately across generations. The development of written religious literature represented a significant advance in human spiritual and intellectual development. Previous religious traditions had relied primarily on oral transmission of sacred stories, prayers, and ritual instructions, which were subject to gradual change and variation over time. Written religious texts provided stable, authoritative versions of sacred traditions that could be studied, interpreted, and transmitted with much greater accuracy and consistency. Religious writing also served important social and political functions in Sumerian society. Written religious texts provided legitimacy for rulers and institutions by connecting them to divine authority and cosmic order. They preserved cultural memory and identity by recording the stories, beliefs, and practices that defined Sumerian civilization. They also provided frameworks for understanding and interpreting human experience that helped individuals and communities make sense of their place in the world. The development of religious literature required innovations in literary technique and theological thinking that pushed the boundaries of human intellectual achievement. Religious writers had to find ways to express complex spiritual concepts and experiences in written form, developing sophisticated approaches to symbolism, metaphor, and narrative structure that could convey profound truths about divine and human nature. These literary innovations influenced not only religious writing but also secular literature and intellectual discourse more generally. The development of mathematical and scientific writing represented another crucial application of literacy that had lasting impact on human knowledge and achievement. Sumerian scribes developed sophisticated mathematical notation systems that enabled them to perform complex calculations, solve practical problems, and explore abstract mathematical concepts. These mathematical achievements laid the foundations for subsequent developments in mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and other scientific fields. The mathematical knowledge preserved in Sumerian texts reveals remarkable sophistication in areas such as arithmetic, geometry, and algebraic thinking. Sumerian mathematicians understood concepts such as place value notation, developed techniques for solving quadratic equations, and created sophisticated geometric methods for calculating areas and volumes. These achievements demonstrate a level of mathematical thinking that would not be surpassed in many parts of the world for thousands of years. Sumerian mathematical texts reveal remarkable sophistication in areas such as geometry, algebra, and number theory. They developed positional notation systems, understood concepts such as place value and zero, and could solve complex problems involving areas, volumes, and proportional relationships. These mathematical achievements were not merely abstract intellectual exercises, but served practical purposes in areas such as construction, agriculture, commerce, and administration. The practical applications of Sumerian mathematics were extensive and sophisticated, reflecting the complex needs of urban civilization. Mathematical techniques were used in architectural design and construction, ensuring that buildings were properly proportioned and structurally sound. They were applied in agricultural planning and management, helping farmers optimize crop yields and manage irrigation systems. They were essential for commercial activities, enabling merchants to calculate prices, profits, and exchange rates accurately. The preservation of mathematical knowledge through writing enabled cumulative development in ways that had never before been possible. Each generation of mathematicians could build upon the work of their predecessors, leading to increasingly sophisticated understanding and capability. This process of cumulative intellectual development, made possible by writing, established patterns of scientific and technological progress that continue to characterize human civilization today. The development of written mathematical texts also required innovations in notation, organization, and presentation that influenced the development of scientific writing more generally. Mathematical writers had to find ways to represent numerical relationships, geometric concepts, and problem-solving procedures in clear and systematic ways that could be understood and applied by other readers. These innovations in scientific communication laid the foundations for all subsequent developments in technical and scholarly writing. The influence of Sumerian writing extended far beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia itself, as the technology and many of its applications were adopted and adapted by neighboring cultures throughout the ancient world. The spread of writing technology represented one of the most important processes of cultural diffusion in human history, as it enabled the development of literate civilizations throughout the Middle East, Mediterranean region, and beyond. The process of adapting Sumerian writing techniques to other languages and cultures required significant innovation and creativity, as different languages had different structural characteristics that required different approaches to written representation. The successful adaptation of writing technology to diverse linguistic and cultural contexts demonstrates both the fundamental importance of literacy and the remarkable creativity and adaptability of human societies in adopting and modifying new technologies to meet their specific needs. Different cultures adapted Sumerian writing principles to their own languages and needs, creating new writing systems that preserved the basic concepts while reflecting local linguistic and cultural characteristics. This process of adaptation and modification led to the development of numerous writing systems throughout the ancient world, each contributing to the preservation and transmission of human knowledge and cultural achievement. The long-term impact of the invention of writing on human civilization cannot be overstated. Writing made possible the accumulation and transmission of knowledge across generations, enabling the development of increasingly sophisticated understanding in all areas of human endeavor. It created new forms of social organization and professional specialization that contributed to the complexity and achievement of urban civilization. It provided the foundation for law, government, religion, literature, science, and countless other aspects of human culture that continue to shape our world today. Understanding the development of writing in ancient Sumer helps us appreciate both the remarkable achievement that literacy represents and the continuing importance of written communication in human society. The basic principles and applications of writing that were first developed in Sumerian cities remain central to human civilization today, even as the technology and methods of written communication have evolved dramatically over the millennia. The legacy of Sumerian innovations in writing continues to influence how we preserve knowledge, organize information, and communicate complex ideas across time and space. The religious and spiritual life of ancient Sumer represents one of the most complex and influential aspects of early urban civilization, establishing patterns of belief, practice, and institutional organization that would profoundly influence human culture for thousands of years. The Sumerian approach to religion was not simply a matter of personal belief or private devotion, but formed the very foundation of social organization, political authority, and cultural identity in ways that touched every aspect of urban life. The development of Sumerian religion reflected the complex social and cultural dynamics of urban civilization, as traditional village spiritual practices evolved to meet the needs and circumstances of much larger and more diverse communities. The gods and goddesses of the Sumerian pantheon embodied the forces and relationships that governed urban life, from the cosmic powers that controlled natural phenomena to the more specific deities who presided over particular crafts, professions, and aspects of daily experience. The Sumerian pantheon consisted of hundreds of deities, each with specific roles, characteristics, and areas of influence that reflected the complexity and sophistication of urban society itself. At the head of this divine hierarchy stood gods such as An, the god of heaven, Enlil, the god of air and storms, and Enki, the god of water and wisdom. These major deities were conceived as cosmic forces that controlled the fundamental aspects of existence, while lesser gods governed more specific aspects of daily life such as crafts, agriculture, warfare, and human relationships. The hierarchical organization of the Sumerian pantheon mirrored the social structure of urban civilization, with major gods serving as divine rulers who governed lesser deities just as earthly kings ruled over their subjects. This parallel between divine and human organization provided a cosmic framework for understanding and legitimizing the social hierarchies that characterized urban life, while also offering models for proper relationships between rulers and subjects, superiors and subordinates. The relationship between the gods and human society was understood in terms that reflected the hierarchical organization of urban civilization itself. Just as earthly cities were ruled by kings and governed by complex administrative systems, the divine realm was conceived as a cosmic state with its own rulers, officials, and bureaucratic structures. This parallel between earthly and heavenly organization provided divine legitimacy for human institutions, while also offering a framework for understanding the cosmic order that governed all existence. The concept of divine governance extended beyond simple political metaphors to encompass sophisticated understanding of the relationships between cosmic order and human society. The gods were understood to have established the fundamental principles that governed both natural phenomena and human behavior, creating a unified framework that connected individual actions with cosmic consequences. This understanding provided both guidance for proper conduct and explanations for the experiences and challenges that people encountered in their daily lives. Each Sumerian city was believed to belong to a particular patron deity who served as its divine ruler and protector. The city of Uruk belonged to the goddess Inanna, goddess of love and war, while Ur was associated with the moon god Nanna and Eridu with the god Enki. This concept of divine ownership created a unique relationship between religious and political authority, as earthly rulers were understood to serve as representatives or stewards of the gods, rather than as absolute monarchs in their own right. The relationship between cities and their patron deities created complex networks of religious and political alliance that influenced interurban relations throughout Mesopotamia. Cities that shared religious traditions or whose patron deities were understood to be related or allied often developed closer political and economic relationships, while religious differences could contribute to conflicts and competition between urban centers. The great temples that dominated Sumerian cities were not merely places of worship, but served as the earthly residences of the gods, complete with elaborate living quarters, dining facilities, and service areas that mirrored the palaces of earthly rulers. These temples were conceived as functioning households where the gods resided and carried out their daily activities, requiring constant care and attention from human servants who ensured that their divine masters were properly fed, clothed, and entertained. The conception of temples as divine households required elaborate systems of service and maintenance that employed hundreds of people and consumed vast resources. Temple personnel included not only priests and religious specialists, but also cooks, servants, craftsmen, administrators, and laborers who maintained the complex operations necessary to provide proper care for the resident deity. These temple households became major economic and social institutions that played central roles in urban life. The daily routine of temple life involved elaborate ceremonies and rituals that maintained the proper relationship between the human and divine communities. Each morning, the god's statue was awakened, washed, dressed in fine clothing, and presented with meals of the finest foods available. Throughout the day, priests and other temple personnel performed various services and ceremonies designed to honor the god and ensure continued divine favor for the city and its inhabitants. These daily rituals were not simply ceremonial observances, but were understood as essential activities that maintained the cosmic order and ensured the continued prosperity and security of the community. The proper performance of temple rituals was believed to influence everything from agricultural productivity to military success to protection from natural disasters, making the temple staff responsible for the fundamental welfare of the entire urban population. The economic role of temples in Sumerian society was enormous, as these institutions controlled vast amounts of land, livestock, and other resources that were considered to belong to the gods. Temple estates employed thousands of people in various capacities, from farmers and herders to craftsmen and administrators, making the temples among the largest economic enterprises in Sumerian cities. The wealth and resources controlled by temples enabled them to undertake massive construction projects, support elaborate artistic and cultural activities, and provide social services that benefited the entire community. The management of temple resources required sophisticated administrative systems and professional expertise that contributed significantly to the development of urban organizational capabilities. Temple administrators had to coordinate complex agricultural operations, manage manufacturing and craft production, oversee construction projects, and maintain detailed records of all economic activities. These administrative challenges pushed the boundaries of human organizational capability and contributed to innovations in management and record-keeping that influenced all aspects of urban society. The priesthood that served in Sumerian temples represented one of the most important and influential professional groups in urban society. Priests were not simply religious functionaries, but served as intermediaries between the human and divine communities, possessing specialized knowledge and skills that were essential to the proper functioning of society. The training and education of priests involved years of study in areas such as ritual practice, religious law, sacred literature, mathematics, and astronomy, making them among the most educated and knowledgeable individuals in their communities. The education and training of priests took place in temple schools that were among the most sophisticated educational institutions in the ancient world. These schools provided instruction not only in religious subjects, but also in mathematics, literature, law, and other areas of knowledge that were considered essential for educated individuals. The graduates of these schools often went on to serve not only as religious officials, but also as administrators, scholars, and cultural leaders who played important roles in all aspects of urban society. Different ranks and types of priests served various functions within the temple hierarchy, from high priests who oversaw major ceremonies and administrative functions, to specialized priests who performed particular rituals or maintained specific aspects of temple operations. Female priests and priestesses played important roles in many temples, particularly those dedicated to goddesses, and could achieve positions of considerable authority and influence within religious institutions. The diversity of priestly roles and specializations reflected the complexity and sophistication of Sumerian religious life, as different aspects of divine service required different types of knowledge and expertise. Some priests specialized in the performance of specific rituals or ceremonies, while others focused on administrative functions, scholarly activities, or the maintenance of temple property and resources. This specialization enabled the development of highly sophisticated religious practices and institutions that served the complex needs of urban society. The ritual calendar that governed Sumerian religious life was extraordinarily complex, involving daily, monthly, and annual ceremonies that marked important transitions in the agricultural cycle, celestial events, and mythological commemorations. These rituals served multiple functions, maintaining proper relationships with the gods, reinforcing social bonds within the community, and providing frameworks for understanding and interpreting human experience within cosmic contexts. The complexity of the Sumerian ritual calendar required sophisticated understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and agricultural cycles that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge and observational capability. Priests had to track the movements of celestial bodies, calculate the timing of seasonal changes, and coordinate multiple overlapping cycles of religious observance that required precise timing and careful preparation. One of the most important annual festivals was the New Year celebration, which typically lasted for several days and involved elaborate ceremonies that symbolically renewed the cosmic order and ensured prosperity for the coming year. These festivals brought together the entire community in collective celebration and worship, reinforcing social unity while also demonstrating the wealth and cultural sophistication of the city to visitors from other regions. The New Year festivals and other major religious celebrations required enormous resources and coordination, involving elaborate processions, dramatic presentations, musical performances, and communal feasting that engaged the entire urban population. These events served not only religious functions, but also provided opportunities for artistic expression, social interaction, and cultural exchange that enriched the lives of all participants and strengthened community bonds. The mythology and sacred literature that developed in Sumerian culture provided rich narratives that explained the origins of the world, the nature of divine and human relationships, and the proper ordering of society and cosmos. These stories were not merely entertainment, but served as foundational texts that shaped how Sumerians understood their place in the world and their obligations to both gods and fellow humans. The creation myths of Sumer describe the emergence of order from primordial chaos through the actions of the gods, establishing patterns of divine authority and cosmic organization that served as models for human society. These myths explained not only how the world came to be, but also why it was organized in particular ways, providing divine sanction for social hierarchies, political institutions, and cultural practices that might otherwise have seemed arbitrary or questionable. The concept of divine justice played a central role in Sumerian religious thought, as the gods were believed to uphold moral order and punish those who violated cosmic law. This belief provided important foundations for human legal and ethical systems, as earthly justice was understood to reflect divine principles and standards. The idea that the gods demanded justice and righteousness from human beings helped to legitimize legal institutions, while also providing moral frameworks that guided individual and collective behavior. Sumerian religious thought also grappled with fundamental questions about human mortality and the afterlife in ways that influenced subsequent religious traditions throughout the ancient world. The Sumerian conception of death and the afterlife was generally pessimistic, envisioning the realm of the dead as a dreary underworld where the spirits of the deceased existed in shadowy, diminished forms. This understanding of death created urgency about achieving meaning and fulfillment in earthly life, while also emphasizing the importance of proper burial practices and memorial rituals. The influence of Sumerian religious ideas extended far beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia itself, as many concepts, practices, and institutional forms were adopted and adapted by subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. The Sumerian pantheon provided models for later religious systems, while Sumerian myths and religious literature influenced the development of religious thought in cultures as diverse as those of ancient Greece, Israel, and India. Understanding the religious dimensions of Sumerian civilization helps us appreciate the central role that spiritual beliefs and practices played in shaping early urban society. The complex relationships between religious and secular authority, the sophisticated theological and mythological systems that Sumerians developed, and the institutional structures they created to manage religious life, all contributed to the remarkable achievements of their civilization, while also establishing precedents that continue to influence human culture today. The remarkable intellectual achievements of Sumerian civilization extended far beyond their innovations in writing and urban organization, encompassing groundbreaking developments in mathematics, astronomy, and scientific thinking that would establish foundational principles for human knowledge systems across millennia. The Sumerians approached the natural world with systematic curiosity and methodical observation, developing mathematical concepts and astronomical understanding that demonstrated sophisticated analytical thinking and laid crucial groundwork for later scientific traditions. Their intellectual pursuits were not merely practical endeavors driven by immediate needs, but represented genuine attempts to understand the underlying principles governing natural phenomena and mathematical relationships. The emergence of Sumerian mathematical thinking can be traced to the practical demands of their complex society, where administrators needed to calculate taxes, merchants required precise measurements for trade, and architects demanded accurate proportions for construction projects. However, the mathematical systems they developed transcended these immediate practical applications to become sophisticated intellectual frameworks that revealed deep insights into numerical relationships and geometric principles. The Sumerians recognized that mathematical thinking could provide powerful tools for understanding and manipulating the world around them, leading to innovations that would influence mathematical development for thousands of years. Sumerian mathematics represented one of humanity's earliest systematic approaches to numerical thinking and quantitative analysis. Their mathematical system was based on the number 60, creating what scholars call the sexagesimal system, which proved remarkably effective for complex calculations and measurements. This base 60 system emerged from practical needs related to trade, construction, and astronomical observation, but its mathematical elegance and computational power made it extraordinarily influential in subsequent mathematical traditions. The sophistication of this system becomes apparent when we consider that it required abstract thinking about numerical relationships and positional values that represented significant cognitive achievements for early human societies. The development of the sexagesimal system reflected careful observation of natural cycles and practical requirements for measurement and calculation. The Sumerians noticed that 60 could accommodate the approximate number of days in 2 lunar months, making it useful for calendar calculations. They also discovered that 60 provided exceptional flexibility for fractional calculations, as it could be divided evenly by more numbers than any smaller base system. This mathematical insight demonstrated remarkable analytical thinking and established foundations for computational systems that would prove enduring and influential. The choice of 60 as a mathematical base reflected the Sumerians' sophisticated understanding of numerical relationships and divisibility. 60 can be divided evenly by many different numbers, including 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30, making it exceptionally useful for practical calculations involving fractions and proportional relationships. This mathematical flexibility proved invaluable for merchants calculating trade ratios, architects designing building proportions, and administrators managing complex economic transactions. The practical advantages of the sexagesimal system were so significant that it continued to influence mathematical practice long after other civilizations had developed alternative numerical systems. The mathematical elegance of the sexagesimal system extended beyond simple divisibility to encompass sophisticated approaches to fractional calculations and geometric relationships. Sumerian mathematicians developed techniques for expressing complex fractions as combinations of simpler fractions, enabling precise calculations that would have been extremely difficult using other numerical systems. They also created methods for calculating areas, volumes, and geometric proportions that demonstrated advanced understanding of mathematical relationships and spatial reasoning. Sumerian mathematical innovations included the development of positional notation, where the value of a numerical symbol depends on its position within a larger number. This concept represented a profound intellectual breakthrough that made complex mathematical operations possible and laid essential foundations for all subsequent mathematical systems. The development of positional notation required abstract thinking about numerical relationships and symbolic representation that represented remarkable cognitive achievements for early human societies. This innovation enabled Sumerian mathematicians to perform calculations that would have been impossible using simpler counting systems. The implications of positional notation extended far beyond immediate computational advantages to encompass fundamental changes in mathematical thinking and problem-solving approaches. By enabling the representation of very large numbers and complex calculations, positional notation opened new possibilities for mathematical analysis and scientific investigation. Sumerian mathematicians could now tackle problems involving astronomical calculations, architectural planning, and economic analysis that required precision and complexity previously unattainable. The Sumerians also developed sophisticated techniques for handling fractions, square roots, and geometric calculations that demonstrated remarkable mathematical sophistication. Their approaches to fractional arithmetic involved converting complex fractions into series of simpler fractions that could be easily manipulated and calculated. They developed methods for approximating square roots that provided sufficient accuracy for practical applications, while revealing understanding of iterative mathematical processes in convergence series. Archaeological evidence reveals that Sumerian mathematicians created detailed mathematical tables for multiplication, division, and more complex operations, suggesting systematic mathematical education and professional mathematical practice. These tablets demonstrate that Sumerian mathematics went far beyond simple counting and basic arithmetic to encompass advanced mathematical concepts and computational techniques that would not be surpassed for many centuries. The existence of these mathematical tables indicates that mathematical knowledge was systematically organized, taught, and preserved within Sumerian educational institutions. The mathematical tables discovered by archaeologists revealed the remarkable scope and sophistication of Sumerian mathematical knowledge. These tablets include multiplication tables, reciprocal tables for division calculations, tables of squares and square roots, and even tables for calculating compound interest and geometric progressions. The precision and organization of these tables demonstrate that Sumerian mathematics had developed into a systematic discipline with standardized procedures and professional practitioners. The practical applications of Sumerian mathematics were extensive and impressive, encompassing engineering, architecture, agriculture, and commerce. Sumerian builders used sophisticated geometric principles to construct massive ziggurats and complex irrigation systems, requiring precise calculations of angles, proportions, and structural loads. Their mathematical knowledge enabled them to create architectural marvels that demonstrated both aesthetic sophistication and engineering excellence. The construction of ziggurats, in particular, required advanced understanding of geometric relationships, structural engineering, and proportional design that showcased the practical applications of their mathematical innovations. The engineering achievements of Sumerian civilization provide compelling evidence of their mathematical sophistication and practical problem-solving abilities. Their irrigation systems required precise calculations of water flow, channel gradients, and distribution networks that demanded both mathematical knowledge and engineering expertise. The Sumerians developed techniques for calculating the optimal dimensions and slopes for irrigation channels, ensuring efficient water distribution while preventing erosion and siltation problems. Sumerian astronomical observations and mathematical analysis of celestial phenomena represented another area of extraordinary intellectual achievement. The Sumerians were among the first peoples to systematically observe and record the movements of celestial bodies, developing detailed calendars and astronomical knowledge that influenced religious practices, agricultural planning, and civil administration. Their astronomical work combined careful observational techniques with sophisticated mathematical analysis, creating knowledge systems that provided both practical benefits and intellectual insights into the nature of celestial phenomena. The motivation for Sumerian astronomical investigation arose from multiple sources, including practical needs for accurate calendars, religious beliefs about divine communication through celestial events, and intellectual curiosity about the patterns and regularities observed in celestial movements. This combination of practical, religious, and intellectual motivations created a comprehensive approach to astronomical study that produced remarkably accurate observations and sophisticated theoretical understanding. The Sumerian calendar system reflected sophisticated astronomical understanding and mathematical precision. They developed a lunar calendar based on careful observation of moon phases, but they also recognized the need to reconcile lunar months with the solar year for agricultural and administrative purposes. This challenge led to the development of complex mathematical techniques for calendar adjustment and the creation of intercalary months to maintain seasonal alignment. The mathematical complexity of calendar calculation required understanding of cyclical patterns, fractional relationships, and long-term astronomical cycles that demonstrated advanced analytical thinking. The problem of calendar coordination between lunar and solar cycles presented Sumerian astronomers with a complex mathematical challenge that required sophisticated solutions. The lunar month of approximately 29½ days could not be easily reconciled with the solar year of approximately 365¼ days. Sumerian astronomers developed mathematical techniques for calculating the accumulated differences between lunar and solar cycles, enabling them to determine when additional months needed to be inserted to maintain calendar accuracy. Sumerian astronomers identified and named many constellations, tracked the movements of planets, and developed detailed records of eclipses and other celestial events. Their astronomical observations were motivated by both practical and religious concerns, as they believed that celestial phenomena provided important information about divine intentions and earthly events. This integration of scientific observation with religious interpretation created a distinctive approach to astronomical study that influenced later astronomical traditions. The systematic nature of their observations and record-keeping established methodological precedents that would prove essential for the development of scientific astronomy. The constellation systems developed by Sumerian astronomers provided organizational frameworks for understanding and predicting celestial movements. By grouping stars into recognizable patterns and tracking their seasonal appearances, Sumerian astronomers created reference systems that enabled precise observation and prediction of celestial events. These constellation systems were adopted and adapted by later civilizations, forming the basis for astronomical traditions that continue to influence modern astronomy. The mathematical precision of Sumerian astronomical calculations is particularly impressive, given the technological limitations of their era. Without telescopes or other advanced instruments, Sumerian astronomers relied on careful naked-eye observations and sophisticated mathematical analysis to track celestial movements and predict astronomical events. Their ability to calculate lunar and solar cycles with remarkable accuracy demonstrates both observational skill and mathematical sophistication. The precision of their eclipse predictions, in particular, required understanding of complex cyclical patterns and mathematical relationships that represented extraordinary intellectual achievements. The techniques developed by Sumerian astronomers for predicting eclipses involve sophisticated mathematical analysis of lunar and solar cycles, requiring understanding of the geometric relationships between Earth, Moon, and Sun. They developed methods for calculating the timing and visibility of eclipses that demonstrated remarkable precision and theoretical understanding. These predictive capabilities provided both practical benefits for agricultural and administrative planning and religious significance for understanding divine communications. Sumerian contributions to early scientific thinking extended beyond mathematics and astronomy to encompass systematic approaches to understanding the natural world. They developed early forms of what might be called scientific methodology, emphasizing careful observation, systematic record-keeping, and logical analysis of natural phenomena. These intellectual approaches established important precedents for later scientific traditions and demonstrated the human capacity for rational inquiry into natural processes. The Sumerian commitment to systematic investigation and logical analysis created intellectual frameworks that would prove essential for the development of scientific thinking. The methodological approaches developed by Sumerian investigators emphasized the importance of careful observation, systematic data collection, and logical analysis of patterns and relationships. They recognized that understanding natural phenomena required patient observation over extended periods, systematic recording of observations, and careful analysis of patterns and correlations. These methodological insights established intellectual foundations that would prove essential for the development of scientific investigation and rational inquiry. The Sumerian approach to medical knowledge exemplified their systematic thinking about natural phenomena. Sumerian medical practitioners developed detailed diagnostic techniques, therapeutic procedures, and pharmaceutical knowledge based on careful observation of symptoms, treatment outcomes, and the properties of various substances. While their medical understanding was limited by the knowledge available in their era, their methodical approach to medical practice demonstrated scientific thinking and established important precedents for medical education and practice. Their medical texts reveal systematic approaches to diagnosis, treatment, and prevention that demonstrated rational analysis of health and disease. Sumerian medical practitioners developed sophisticated diagnostic procedures that involved careful observation of symptoms, systematic questioning of patients, and logical analysis of possible causes and treatments. They created detailed classifications of diseases and symptoms that enabled more precise diagnosis and treatment selection. Their pharmaceutical knowledge included understanding of plant properties, mineral substances, and preparation techniques that demonstrated systematic investigation of therapeutic materials and methods. Sumerian technological innovations also reflected sophisticated scientific understanding and engineering expertise. Their development of metallurgy, particularly the creation of bronze alloys, required precise understanding of material properties, temperature control, and chemical processes. The Sumerians experimented with different metal combinations and smelting techniques to create tools, weapons, and artistic objects that demonstrated both technical skill and aesthetic sophistication. Their metallurgical achievements required systematic investigation of material properties and manufacturing processes that exemplified scientific approaches to technological development. The metallurgical innovations of Sumerian craftsmen involved sophisticated understanding of chemical processes, temperature control, and material properties that required systematic experimentation and careful analysis of results. They developed techniques for extracting metals from ores, creating alloys with desired properties, and manufacturing tools and weapons that demonstrated superior performance characteristics. These technological achievements required both theoretical understanding and practical expertise that exemplified the integration of scientific thinking with practical application. The influence of Sumerian mathematical and scientific achievements extended far beyond Mesopotamia itself, as their knowledge systems were adopted and developed by subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. The sexagesimal system continued to influence mathematical thinking for millennia, and traces of Sumerian mathematical concepts can still be found in modern systems for measuring time and angles. Our division of hours into 60 minutes and minutes into 60 seconds directly reflects the enduring influence of Sumerian mathematical thinking. The persistence of these mathematical conventions demonstrates the fundamental soundness and practical utility of Sumerian mathematical innovations. The transmission of Sumerian mathematical knowledge occurred through various cultural intermediaries, including Babylonian, Assyrian, and Persian civilizations that adopted and refined Sumerian mathematical techniques. These later civilizations preserved and developed Sumerian mathematical innovations while adapting them to their own cultural contexts and practical needs. The mathematical knowledge that originated in ancient Sumer thus became part of a continuing tradition of mathematical development that influenced civilizations across the ancient world. Greek mathematicians and astronomers built upon Sumerian foundations, developing more sophisticated mathematical theories and astronomical models, while maintaining many fundamental concepts and techniques that originated in ancient Mesopotamia. The transmission of Sumerian mathematical and astronomical knowledge through various cultural intermediaries ensured that their intellectual achievements continued to influence human understanding of mathematics and natural phenomena across centuries and civilizations. The mathematical and astronomical traditions that emerged in ancient Greece incorporated many Sumerian innovations while developing new theoretical frameworks and analytical techniques. The influence of Sumerian mathematical and astronomical knowledge on Greek intellectual development can be traced through various historical connections and cultural exchanges. Greek scholars had access to Mesopotamian mathematical and astronomical texts through contacts with Persian and Babylonian scholars, enabling them to build upon Sumerian foundations while developing their own distinctive approaches to mathematical and scientific investigation. This cultural transmission created intellectual continuities that connected ancient Sumerian innovations with later Greek achievements. The integration of mathematical, astronomical, and practical knowledge in Sumerian civilization demonstrates the interconnected nature of intellectual development and the importance of systematic thinking in advancing human understanding. The Sumerians recognized that mathematical principles could be applied to diverse areas of human activity, from architecture and engineering to commerce and administration, creating intellectual frameworks that enhanced both practical effectiveness and theoretical understanding. This integrative approach to knowledge development established precedents for interdisciplinary thinking that remain relevant for contemporary intellectual and practical challenges. The holistic approach to knowledge that characterized Sumerian intellectual life created synergistic relationships between different areas of investigation and application. Mathematical innovations enhanced astronomical observation and prediction, while astronomical knowledge improved calendar systems and agricultural planning. Practical applications of mathematical and scientific knowledge, in turn, generated new problems and challenges that stimulated further intellectual development and innovation. Modern scholars continue to discover new evidence of Sumerian mathematical and scientific sophistication as archaeological excavations uncover additional tablets and artifacts that reveal the depth and complexity of their intellectual achievements. Recent discoveries have shown that Sumerian mathematical knowledge was even more advanced than previously recognized, with evidence of sophisticated geometric theorems and computational techniques that anticipate later mathematical developments. These ongoing discoveries continue to expand our appreciation of Sumerian intellectual achievements and their influence on subsequent mathematical and scientific traditions. Archaeological investigations have revealed Sumerian mathematical tablets that demonstrate knowledge of geometric relationships and computational techniques that were previously thought to have been developed much later in mathematical history. These discoveries suggest that Sumerian mathematicians had developed sophisticated theoretical understanding and practical techniques that represented remarkable intellectual achievements for their historical period. The continuing discovery of new evidence indicates that our understanding of Sumerian mathematical and scientific accomplishments remains incomplete and that future archaeological work may reveal even more impressive achievements. The legacy of Sumerian scientific thinking extends beyond specific mathematical or astronomical discoveries to encompass fundamental approaches to understanding and analyzing the natural world. Their emphasis on systematic observation, careful record-keeping, and logical analysis established intellectual traditions that remain central to scientific methodology today. The Sumerian conviction that natural phenomena could be understood through careful study and mathematical analysis provided crucial foundations for the development of scientific thinking throughout human history. These methodological approaches continue to influence contemporary scientific investigation and rational inquiry. The intellectual frameworks developed by Sumerian scholars establish precedents for systematic investigation and logical analysis that transcended their specific cultural context to become universal principles of rational inquiry. Their commitment to careful observation, systematic data collection, and logical analysis created methodological foundations that proved essential for the development of scientific thinking across cultures and historical periods. The enduring relevance of these intellectual approaches demonstrates the fundamental soundness of Sumerian contributions to human knowledge and understanding. Understanding Sumerian contributions to mathematics, astronomy, and scientific thinking helps us appreciate the remarkable intellectual achievements of early civilization and the continuing influence of ancient knowledge systems on modern understanding. The sophisticated mathematical concepts, precise astronomical observations, and systematic approaches to natural phenomena that characterized Sumerian intellectual life demonstrate the extraordinary capacity of human beings to develop complex knowledge systems even in the earliest stages of civilized society. These achievements provide inspiration and guidance for contemporary efforts to advance human knowledge and understanding. The example of Sumerian intellectual achievement demonstrates that sophisticated thinking and systematic investigation are not exclusively modern phenomena, but represent fundamental human capacities that have been expressed throughout history when social and cultural conditions have provided appropriate support and encouragement. The intellectual achievements of ancient Sumer remind us that human creativity and analytical thinking have always had the potential to produce remarkable insights and innovations when directed towards systematic investigation and practical application. The cultural and intellectual legacy of Sumerian civilization extends far beyond their specific technological and scientific achievements to encompass fundamental contributions to human culture, social organization, and intellectual development that continue to influence modern society in profound and often unrecognized ways. The institutional forms, cultural practices, and intellectual frameworks that emerged in ancient Sumer established precedents and patterns that have shaped human civilization across millennia, creating enduring foundations for contemporary social, political, and cultural life. The comprehensive nature of Sumerian cultural innovation created integrated systems of knowledge and practice that provided models for subsequent civilizational development. The transformative impact of Sumerian cultural innovations extended across multiple domains of human experience, from practical technologies and social institutions to intellectual frameworks and artistic expression. This comprehensive approach to cultural development created synergistic relationships between different areas of innovation that enhanced the overall effectiveness and sustainability of Sumerian civilizational achievements. The integrated nature of Sumerian cultural innovation provides valuable insights into the processes of successful civilizational development and the importance of holistic approaches to social and cultural progress. The Sumerian invention of writing represents perhaps their most transformative contribution to human culture, as it fundamentally altered the possibilities for communication, education, record-keeping, and cultural transmission. The development of cuneiform writing enabled the preservation and transmission of knowledge across generations in ways that had never before been possible, creating the foundation for all subsequent literary, legal, and scholarly traditions. Without Sumerian innovations in writing, the accumulated knowledge and cultural achievements of human civilization would have been impossible. The revolutionary impact of writing extended far beyond simple record-keeping to encompass fundamental changes in human consciousness and social organization. The development of writing systems required sophisticated understanding of the relationships between spoken language, symbolic representation, and meaningful communication. Sumerian scribes had to develop techniques for representing complex linguistic concepts through visual symbols, creating systematic approaches to symbolic communication that required both analytical thinking and creative problem-solving. The intellectual achievements involved in creating effective writing systems demonstrate the remarkable cognitive capabilities and cultural sophistication of Sumerian civilization. The influence of Sumerian writing extends beyond the technical aspects of recording information to encompass fundamental changes in human consciousness and social organization. The ability to create permanent records transformed legal systems, enabling the development of complex law codes and legal procedures that provided unprecedented precision and consistency in judicial processes. Written contracts and agreements revolutionized commercial relationships, making possible the sophisticated trade networks and economic systems that characterized later civilizations. The social and economic implications of writing created new possibilities for human cooperation and organization that proved essential for the development of complex civilizations. The transformation of legal systems through written documentation created new possibilities for justice administration and social organization that had far-reaching implications for human social development. Written laws provided consistency and predictability in legal proceedings while enabling the development of complex legal concepts and procedures that enhanced fairness and effectiveness in dispute resolution. The availability of written legal precedents and procedures created institutional frameworks that could be transmitted across generations and adapted to changing social conditions. Educational systems and intellectual traditions were similarly transformed by Sumerian writing innovations. the establishment of schools for training scribes created the first formal educational institutions in human history, establishing precedents for systematic instruction, curriculum development, and professional training that continue to influence educational practice today. The preservation of literary works, mathematical knowledge, and technical information in written form enabled the accumulation and transmission of cultural knowledge in ways that oral traditions could never achieve. These educational innovations created intellectual foundations that proved essential for the continued development of human knowledge and culture. The institutional frameworks developed for scribal education established precedents for systematic knowledge transmission that influenced educational development throughout subsequent history. Sumerian schools developed curricula, teaching methods, and assessment procedures that provided models for educational institutions across cultures and historical periods. The professional training provided in these educational institutions created intellectual traditions and scholarly practices that continue to influence learning and knowledge development long after Sumerian civilization itself had ended. Sumerian contributions to literature and storytelling established narrative forms and thematic concerns that continue to influence literary traditions across cultures and centuries. The Epic of Gilgamesh, with its exploration of friendship, mortality, and the search for meaning, established literary themes and narrative structures that appear repeatedly in subsequent literary works. The sophisticated character development, complex plot structures, and philosophical depth of Sumerian literature demonstrate the remarkable artistic and intellectual achievements of early civilization. These literary innovations created artistic frameworks and thematic traditions that proved enduringly influential in human cultural expression. The literary achievements of Sumerian civilization demonstrate sophisticated understanding of narrative structure, character development, and thematic exploration that rival the artistic accomplishments of much later literary traditions. The psychological complexity of characters in Sumerian literature, the philosophical depth of their thematic concerns, and the artistic sophistication of their narrative techniques reveal remarkable cultural achievements that established foundational precedents for subsequent literary development. The influence of Sumerian literary traditions can be traced through various cultural intermediaries to later literary works in diverse civilizations. Elements of Sumerian mythology and storytelling appear in Greek literature, Hebrew scriptures, and other ancient texts, demonstrating the widespread influence of Sumerian cultural innovations. The archetypal characters, narrative patterns, and thematic concerns that originated in Sumerian literature continue to appear in contemporary literature and popular culture, revealing the enduring power of these early artistic achievements. This cultural transmission demonstrates the universal appeal and fundamental insights contained in Sumerian literary works. The mythological and narrative traditions established by Sumerian literature provided archetypal frameworks that proved remarkably durable and adaptable across different cultural contexts. The hero's journey, the search for immortality, the tension between civilization and nature, and other fundamental themes that appear in Sumerian literature continue to resonate with human experience and appear in various forms throughout world literature. This thematic continuity suggests that Sumerian literary innovations captured fundamental aspects of human experience that transcend specific cultural and historical contexts. Sumerian contributions to religious thought and practice established institutional forms and theological concepts that profoundly influenced the development of later religious traditions. The organization of religious life around temple complexes, the development of professional priesthoods, and the creation of elaborate ritual systems provided models that were adopted and adapted by subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. Many fundamental religious concepts, including ideas about divine justice, cosmic order, and human responsibility, can be traced to Sumerian origins. These religious innovations created institutional and conceptual frameworks that proved remarkably influential in subsequent religious development. The theological concepts developed within Sumerian religious traditions addressed fundamental questions about the nature of divinity, the relationship between gods and humans, and the moral principles governing cosmic order. Sumerian religious thinkers developed sophisticated concepts of divine justice, cosmic balance, and human responsibility that provided frameworks for understanding moral and spiritual questions that continue to influence religious thinking today. These theological innovations demonstrated remarkable intellectual sophistication and spiritual insight that established important precedents for subsequent religious development. The influence of Sumerian religious innovations extends beyond specific institutional forms to encompass fundamental approaches to understanding the relationship between human beings and the divine realm. Sumerian concepts of divine kingship, sacred law, and cosmic justice provided frameworks for political and legal systems that emphasized the connection between earthly authority and divine sanction. These ideas proved extraordinarily influential in subsequent political and religious traditions, establishing precedents for the integration of religious and secular authority that characterized many later civilizations. The synthesis of religious and political authority created governmental frameworks that proved remarkably durable and influential. The concept of divine kingship developed within Sumerian civilization created political frameworks that integrated religious authority with secular governance in ways that provided both legitimacy and stability for governmental institutions. This integration of religious and political authority established precedents for governmental organization that influenced political development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The theoretical foundations and practical implementations of divine kingship created governmental models that proved remarkably adaptable to different cultural contexts while maintaining essential structural characteristics. Sumerian achievements in urban planning and architecture established principles and practices that continue to influence city design and construction techniques today. The development of sophisticated drainage systems, street layouts, and zoning practices in Sumerian cities demonstrated advanced understanding of urban organization and public health considerations. Their architectural innovations, particularly in the construction of monumental buildings like ziggurats, established engineering techniques and aesthetic principles that influenced building traditions across cultures and centuries. These urban planning and architectural achievements created physical frameworks for civilized life that provided models for subsequent urban development. The urban planning innovations developed in Sumerian cities addressed fundamental challenges of organizing large populations in concentrated settlements while maintaining health, safety, and social order. Sumerian city planners developed sophisticated approaches to water supply, waste management, traffic flow, and residential organization that demonstrated advanced understanding of urban dynamics and community needs. These planning innovations established precedents for urban organization that continued to influence city development throughout subsequent history. The social and economic innovations of Sumerian civilization provided foundational models for complex society organization that continue to influence modern institutions and practices. The development of specialized occupations, professional guilds, and complex administrative systems established precedents for economic organization and social stratification that appear in various forms throughout human history. Sumerian innovations in accounting, contract law, and commercial practice created frameworks for economic activity that remain fundamental to modern economic systems. These social and economic innovations created institutional frameworks that proved remarkably durable and adaptable to changing historical circumstances. The economic systems developed within Sumerian civilization established principles and practices for commercial activity, resource allocation, and wealth distribution that influenced economic development throughout subsequent history. Sumerian innovations in banking, credit systems, and commercial law created institutional frameworks for economic activity that provided models for later economic development. The sophistication of Sumerian economic institutions demonstrates remarkable understanding of economic principles and practical requirements for commercial success. The legal traditions that emerged in Sumerian civilization established principles and procedures that continue to influence legal systems worldwide. The development of written law codes, formal legal procedures, and professional legal practitioners created institutional frameworks for justice administration that provided models for later legal systems. Sumerian concepts of legal evidence, procedural fairness, and proportional punishment established precedents that remain central to contemporary legal thinking. These legal innovations created frameworks for justice administration that proved remarkably influential and enduring. The legal concepts and procedures developed within Sumerian civilization addressed fundamental questions about justice, fairness, and social order that remain central to legal thinking today. Sumerian legal innovations included sophisticated approaches to evidence evaluation, procedural safeguards, and punishment proportionality that demonstrated advanced understanding of justice principles and practical requirements for effective legal systems. These legal achievements established intellectual and institutional foundations that continued to influence legal development across cultures and historical periods. The technological innovations of Sumerian civilization, from metallurgy and agriculture to transportation and construction, established technical foundations that enabled subsequent technological development throughout human history. The Sumerian development of the wheel, the sailboat, and various agricultural tools provided technological foundations that were adopted and refined by later civilizations. Their innovations in irrigation, construction techniques, and manufacturing processes established technical knowledge that continued to influence technological development for millennia. These technological achievements created practical foundations for civilized life that proved essential for subsequent human progress. The technological innovations developed within Sumerian civilization addressed fundamental challenges of food production, transportation, construction, and manufacturing that remained central to human technological development. Sumerian technological achievements demonstrated sophisticated understanding of mechanical principles, material properties, and engineering techniques that provided foundations for subsequent technological progress. The practical effectiveness and theoretical sophistication of Sumerian technological innovations established precedents that continued to influence technological development throughout human history. The intellectual achievements of Sumerian civilization in mathematics, astronomy, and systematic thinking established methodological approaches and analytical frameworks that remain fundamental to scientific inquiry today. The Sumerian emphasis on systematic observation, mathematical analysis, and logical reasoning provided intellectual foundations for the development of scientific methodology and rational inquiry. Their mathematical innovations, particularly the sexagesimal system and positional notation, continue to influence mathematical and scientific practice in contemporary society. These intellectual achievements established frameworks for rational inquiry that proved essential for the development of scientific thinking. The methodological approaches developed within Sumerian intellectual traditions established precedents for systematic investigation and logical analysis that transcended their specific cultural context to become universal principles of rational inquiry. Sumerian scholars developed techniques for observation, data collection, hypothesis formation, and logical analysis that provided methodological foundations for scientific investigation. These intellectual innovations demonstrated the human capacity for rational inquiry and systematic investigation that proved essential for the advancement of human knowledge and understanding. The cultural synthesis achieved in Sumerian civilization, integrating technological innovation, artistic achievement, religious insight, and social organization into coherent civilizational forms, established patterns for cultural development that continue to influence human society. The Sumerian demonstration that human beings could create complex, sophisticated, and enduring civilizations provided inspiration and models for subsequent cultural achievements throughout history. This comprehensive approach to civilizational development created integrated systems of knowledge and practice that proved remarkably effective and influential. The integrative approach to cultural development that characterized Sumerian civilization created synergistic relationships between different domains of human activity that enhanced the overall effectiveness and sustainability of their civilizational achievements. The integration of technological innovation with social organization, artistic expression with religious insight, and practical application with theoretical understanding created comprehensive frameworks for human development that provided models for subsequent civilizational progress. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal new evidence of Sumerian achievements and influence, demonstrating that their contributions to human civilization were even more extensive and sophisticated than previously recognized. Recent discoveries of additional texts, artifacts, and architectural remains have expanded our understanding of Sumerian intellectual, artistic, and technological achievements while revealing new connections between Sumerian innovations and later cultural developments. These ongoing discoveries continue to enhance our appreciation of Sumerian contributions to human civilization and their continuing influence on contemporary society. The continuing archaeological investigation of Sumerian sites and artifacts provides expanding evidence of the sophistication and influence of Sumerian civilization. New discoveries regularly reveal previously unknown aspects of Sumerian achievement while confirming the fundamental importance of their contributions to human cultural development. These archaeological findings demonstrate that our understanding of Sumerian civilization remains incomplete, and that future discoveries may reveal even more impressive achievements and influences. The study of Sumerian civilization provides crucial insights into the fundamental processes of cultural development and the essential elements that enable human societies to achieve lasting civilizational success. The Sumerian integration of technological innovation, social organization, intellectual achievement, and artistic expression created a civilizational model that demonstrates the remarkable potential of human creativity and cooperation when directed toward constructive and enduring goals. These insights remain relevant for contemporary efforts to address cultural challenges and promote human progress. The civilizational model established by Sumerian achievement demonstrates the importance of integrated approaches to cultural development that address multiple dimensions of human experience simultaneously. The success of Sumerian civilization resulted from their ability to coordinate technological innovation, social organization, intellectual development, and artistic expression in mutually supportive ways that created comprehensive frameworks for human flourishing. This holistic approach to civilizational development provides valuable guidance for contemporary efforts to promote human progress and cultural achievement. Understanding the legacy of Sumerian civilization helps us appreciate both the continuity and the innovation that characterize human cultural development. The institutional forms, intellectual frameworks, and cultural practices that emerged in ancient Sumer provided foundations upon which subsequent civilizations built their own achievements, creating an ongoing process of cultural transmission and development that continues to shape human society. Today, this cultural continuity demonstrates the enduring value of Sumerian innovations, while highlighting the ongoing nature of human cultural development. The cultural transmission processes that carried Sumerian innovations to subsequent civilizations created continuities in human development that connect ancient achievements with contemporary society. The institutional forms, intellectual frameworks, and cultural practices that originated in ancient Sumer continued to influence human civilization through various intermediary cultures and historical periods, creating ongoing traditions of innovation and development that remain active today. The enduring influence of Sumerian civilization demonstrates the profound impact that early cultural innovations can have on the entire trajectory of human development. The foundations established by Sumerian achievements in writing, law, religion, technology, and social organization created possibilities for human cultural development that continue to influence contemporary society in fundamental and often unrecognized ways. This enduring influence demonstrates the lasting value of their contributions to human civilization and the ongoing relevance of their achievements for contemporary challenges and opportunities. The foundational nature of Sumerian contributions to human civilization means that their influence extends far beyond historical interest to encompass practical guidance for contemporary efforts to promote human progress and cultural achievement. The principles and practices established by Sumerian civilization continue to provide frameworks for addressing contemporary challenges while building foundations for continued human development and cultural progress. As we face contemporary challenges and opportunities, the example of Sumerian civilization provides valuable insights into the processes of cultural innovation and the elements that enable societies to achieve lasting success. The Sumerian demonstration that human beings can create sophisticated, enduring, and beneficial civilizations offers both inspiration and practical guidance for addressing the complex challenges of modern life, while building foundations for continued human progress and cultural achievement. Their legacy continues to provide resources for understanding and promoting human flourishing in contemporary contexts. The example of Sumerian civilizational achievement provides both inspiration and practical guidance for contemporary efforts to address complex social challenges and promote human progress. The integrated approach to cultural development that characterized Sumerian civilization offers valuable insights into the processes of successful social innovation and the elements that enable societies to create lasting improvements in human welfare and cultural achievement. The remarkable story of Sumerian civilization ultimately represents a testament to the extraordinary potential of human creativity, cooperation, and intellectual achievement when directed toward the construction of beneficial and enduring cultural forms. Their legacy continues to enrich human life and provide foundations for continued progress, demonstrating the lasting value of their contributions to the ongoing project of human civilization. This enduring legacy reminds us that human beings have always possessed the capacity for remarkable achievement when social and cultural conditions provide appropriate support and encouragement for creative and constructive endeavors.